Some stories are better heard with someone else. But you're here alone. Welcome to Don't Listen Alone. This is 100% ad-free, just you and whatever comes next. Drop your location and the time before we begin. Now, listen carefully. Not everything you hear is part of the story. In my family, it is my grandmother who has been experiencing strange, disturbing things in their house, and for a while now it has been a quiet source of worry and confusion for all of us. She lives with my aunt and my cousins, and even though she is already getting older, I never really thought of her as weak or completely out of touch with reality. She is 77 years old, and while some people would say that age makes the mind softer or more forgetful, I still see a lot of sharpness and personality in her. However, there are moments when she gets confused, and that is what makes it harder to understand what is really happening to her. My cousin once suggested that maybe my grandmother is just longing for more affection and attention, and that she could be making up some of her stories without fully realizing it, just so people would focus on her, listen to her, and show her care. It is not a cruel thought, just a worried one. But even when we try to see it that way, it does not change the fact that what she says and does can give us chills. There are times when she talks about visitors that no one else can see, and she tells us that these unseen guests poke her back or try to speak with her, especially at night or during quiet hours. The way she says it, with a mix of annoyance and seriousness, makes it hard to simply laugh it off. Even if we try to explain it away, there is always that small, uneasy feeling at the back of our minds. Most of the time, my grandmother stays in the living room with my aunt and my cousins. That room has become the center of her world now. The television is there, the main sofa is there, and from that spot she can see people going in and out of the house. It is where she eats her snacks, rests during the day, and sometimes even sleeps if she does not feel like going to her bedroom. When the family is together, they sit around her in that living room, talking, watching TV, or just passing the time. Because she is always there, everyone notices her small habits, like how she sometimes falls asleep upright for a few minutes, or how she mumbles when she is thinking. Lately though, my aunt and cousins have noticed something else. Every now and then, they realize that my grandmother is quietly mumbling to herself, and then, without warning, her muttering turns into a scolding tone, as if she is talking to a misbehaving child. Her face changes from calm or blank to slightly irritated, her eyebrows pull together, and her voice becomes sharper, the way it does when an adult is trying to correct a naughty kid. They have heard her say the same words more than once, clear and firm, even when no one is standing in front of her. She says things like, "Hoi umalis ka na dayan bata. Wag ka papasak sa bahay na taha," which means, "Hey kid! Get out of here. Don't you dare come into this house again, okay?" She says it like she is really talking to someone, to a specific child she can see right there in the room. My aunt and cousins, who are sitting nearby, look around and see nothing but furniture, walls, and the same familiar things that have always been there. There is no child standing near the doorway, no one sitting on the floor or leaning against the wall. It is just them and my grandmother. When they gather the courage to ask her who she is talking to, she answers in this matter-of-fact way that sends shivers down their spines. She will say something like, "Ian young bata. Di nio be nakikita, on kulit nyan which means, "There, that boy. Can't you see him? He's so playful." She says it as if it is the most obvious thing in the world, as if they should all be able to see this boy just as clearly as she does. But they do not see anything. In those moments, my aunt and cousins usually try to act like it is nothing. They shrug their shoulders, pretend to smile, or simply stay quiet, but inside they are uneasy. They do not want to encourage her too much by asking more, and they also do not want to upset her by saying they do not see anyone. So they sit there, listening, stealing nervous glances at the spot where she says the child is standing, and wondering if maybe something really is there and only she can see it. Sometimes, it does not end with scolding. There are times when my grandmother suddenly laughs, a small sudden laugh that seems to come out of nowhere. She will look towards a certain corner of the room or towards the open door, her eyes following something invisible, and then she will tell my aunt that some people have come into their room, that they are trying to stay for a while and talk to her. She does not always describe them in detail, but you can tell from her tone that she is not talking about real neighbors or relatives. She is referring to people no one else can see. The way she says it is not dramatic or exaggerated. It is calm and conversational, like she is reporting something completely normal. Somehow, that calmness makes it even more unsettling. The creepiest thing that my grandmother did, the one event that really shook my aunt, happened just a couple of weeks ago. My aunt had decided to sleep with my grandmother in the living room. It was not unusual for them to share that space. Sometimes, when it was hot or when my aunt wanted to keep an eye on her, she would bring her own blanket and pillow to the living room and sleep on the other side of the same area. That night seemed like any other night. They arranged themselves, turned off most of the lights, maybe left one dim light on, and then lay down to rest. The house grew quiet, with only the soft sounds of the electric fan, the hum of distant traffic, or the occasional passing motorcycle from outside. My aunt eventually drifted off to sleep, thinking it would just be another ordinary night beside her aging mother. Some time later, while it was still dark and the house was still quiet, my aunt woke up. At first, she did not know why she had woken. She just became aware that she was no longer fully asleep and that something felt different. As her mind grew clearer, she realized that she was being touched. She felt a hand gently caressing her, moving slowly, almost in a soothing way. The touch was not rough or aggressive. It was soft and deliberate, like how someone would stroke a child's head or arm to comfort them. When she turned to see what was happening, she saw that it was my grandmother who was doing it. My grandmother was awake, sitting or leaning nearby, looking down at her while running her hand over her in a careful, almost studying way. Confused and a little unsettled, my aunt asked her, "Ma, why are you doing that?" Or something along those lines, trying to understand what was going on. My grandmother just stared at her for a moment. Then she smiled, a small, simple smile, and answered, "Walla, tinatingnan lankita," which means, "Nothing, I'm just looking at you." Her tone was light, and after saying that, she continued caressing my aunt for a little while longer, as if she were examining her or making sure she was really there. The gesture might have seemed caring on the surface, but in that dark, quiet living room, with everything my grandmother had been saying lately about unseen visitors and people who came to stay and talk, the whole thing felt strange and unnerving. After about a minute, my grandmother stopped, lay back down, and went back to sleep as if nothing had happened, leaving my aunt awake with her heart racing and her thoughts filled with questions and fears she did not know how to voice. Because of episodes like that, my family has tried to be very careful about how we react when my grandmother talks about her experiences. We make an effort not to look doubtful, frustrated, or annoyed in front of her, because when she notices those expressions, it hurts her feelings deeply. To her, these things are real, and when she feels like we do not believe her, she becomes upset and defensive. There have been times when, after she tells a story and sees someone give a skeptical look, or hear a small doubtful comment, she grows angry or sad and challenges them directly. She will ask them if they think she is crazy, if they believe she is losing her mind, if they think she is broken somehow. It pains us to hear her ask those questions, because we do not want her to feel that way. She has lived a long life, taken care of so many people, and the last thing we want is for her to feel like her own family has no faith in her words or her sanity. So we walk a careful line. We listen when she talks. We nod or ask simple questions without pushing too hard. We avoid rolling our eyes or exchanging nervous glances in front of her. If we are scared or unsure, we keep those reactions mostly to ourselves or talk about them quietly when she is not around. Sometimes, we try to comfort her by telling her to pray or to ignore whatever she thinks is there, hoping that it might lessen her fear or discomfort if what she sees ever frightens her. At the same time, we try to comfort each other by suggesting that maybe some of it is confusion, or maybe her imagination has become more active as she grows older. But deep inside, at least for me, it is not that simple. To be honest, I believe her more than I do not. I cannot say I understand everything she is going through, and I cannot prove that what she sees and hears is real, but there is something in the way she talks about it that does not feel like pure invention. It does not sound like a lonely person trying to come up with wild stories just to get attention. It sounds like someone describing events that truly happened to them, even if no one else shared that exact experience. One of the reasons I believe her is because of the history of the land where their house stands. Before their current house was built, there used to be another house there, one that was known in the neighborhood for being very old, one of the oldest structures in that area. People who had lived there before my family, or who had spent time in that old house, had their own stories to tell. According to those who knew the place before, a child was often seen playing around that property. It was not a normal child from the neighborhood, but a figure that appeared every now and then, especially at odd hours or in quiet corners. Some people would see a small form moving near the doorway or running along the yard, a child who did not belong to any of the families nearby. They would glance again and the figure would be gone, leaving them wondering if their eyes had tricked them or if they had caught a glimpse of something from another time. These stories have been passed down and quietly shared among neighbors, and people spoke about that playful child with a mixture of fear and acceptance, like it was simply part of the place's character. When I think about my grandmother telling us that she is scolding a little boy, telling him to get out of the house and not to come back, I cannot help but connect it to that old story about the child who was usually seen playing around the property. It feels too similar to be a coincidence. The way she describes him as immaculate, playful and persistent, matches the way people describe that old presence, always moving around, always there at the edges. Maybe my grandmother is more open to seeing that child than the rest of us are. Maybe whatever lingers from that old house has simply decided that she is the one it will be visible to. Or maybe age has made her more sensitive to whatever lies in the spaces between what is seen and what is unseen. I do not know the answer, and I do not pretend to. I just know that her stories, the way she scolds someone invisible, the way she laughs and says people come into her room to talk, and the way she gently but strangely touched my aunt in the middle of the night, all leave a heavy feeling in my chest. So now, whenever I visit them, I look at the living room a little differently. I see my grandmother sitting in her usual place, and I wonder what she is seeing that I am not. I listen to her words, and even if I do not always show it, I take them seriously. Maybe her mind is getting older, and maybe there are times when confusion really does color her thoughts. But I also cannot ignore the stories of the land, the history of that old house, and the consistent way she talks about the visitors who poke her back or try to speak with her. In the end, I think it is kinder, and maybe closer to the truth, to believe that something is happening that we simply cannot fully understand, instead of assuming that her experiences are nothing more than made-up tales. She may be 77, but she is still the same person who raised and loved us, and if she says there is a playful child she can see and we cannot, a part of me chooses to believe that she just might be right. Our house is a two-story home that, on the surface, looks very normal and ordinary, the kind of place where you would expect nothing more unusual than family dinners, quiet evenings, and the everyday noises of people coming and going. But over the years it has slowly come to feel like a place that we share with more than just the living. The layout is something I grew up with and know by heart. Upstairs is where the family room and all the bedrooms are, a cozy space where we rest, watch television, and spend most of our personal time. Downstairs is where you will find the living room, the dining room, and what we call the clean kitchen. The clean kitchen is neat and organized, with clear counters, shiny cabinets, and appliances that are almost always spotless because we rarely use it for actual cooking. It is more like a show kitchen, reserved for baking or light tasks, a place that smells faintly of sugar, butter, and coffee when anything is being made. From this clean kitchen, there is a door that leads outside to another small building that we call the dirty kitchen. The name sounds a bit harsh, but it is not literally dirty. It is just the main kitchen where all the real cooking happens, where the oil pops in the pan, where food scents cling to the air, and where the floor sometimes gets a bit messy from daily use. That small building also shares space with an area for our dogs, so it has always been a lively corner of our home. The reason we ended up with that separate building is rooted in something that happened back in 2003. A memory that still lingers in our minds like a faint scar. A gas tank in the original kitchen inside the house exploded. The blast burned half of our home, leaving behind blackened walls, broken glass, and a smell of smoke and char that seemed to sink into everything. It was a frightening time, but we were lucky that no one died. Still, the damage was severe enough that the house had to be rebuilt and redesigned. My dad is an architect, and instead of losing hope, he turned that disaster into a chance to reshape our home. He had the burned parts renovated, strengthened, and updated, and he also decided to have a separate small building constructed outside, which became the new dirty kitchen and dog area. That way, the main house could stay cleaner and safer, with less risk of another serious kitchen accident, while the real cooking could be done in a space designed just for that purpose. Over time, this new arrangement became our normal, and I grew used to the rhythm of life between the clean kitchen inside and the busy, warm, sometimes noisy dirty kitchen outside. Our household is small and close-knit. It consists of 4 people: my mom, my dad, our housekeeper, and myself. Our housekeeper has been with us since I was a child, and she has taken care of me for as long as I can remember. She is more than just a helper. She feels like part of the family, almost like a second mother or an aunt, someone who knows my habits, moods, and secrets in a way very few people do. She has seen me grow up, from a little child running around the house to the person I am now, and that long shared history has created a bond between us that is deep and warm. Every 15th of the month, she takes a day off, a well-deserved break when she goes out, runs her own errands, meets friends or relatives, and does whatever she needs or wants to do. She usually leaves in the morning and does not come back until the evening, often arriving just as the light is starting to fade or the sky has already turned dark. On those days, I am the one who usually prepares dinner, especially because my parents often take the opportunity to rest, nap, or catch up on their own quiet time upstairs. I do not mind this arrangement. In fact, I enjoy it. Cooking can be calming when you are alone, and the house feels peaceful when the only sounds are the soft hum of the fridge, the gentle hiss of something heating on the stove, and the occasional movement from our 2 little dogs. We have 2 small Shih Tzu dogs who are both clingy and lovable, the kind of pets who like to follow you around and sleep close to your feet as if they never want to be too far away. They are affectionate, curious, and protective in their own tiny way, always quick to bark when a stranger comes near or when they hear something unfamiliar. When they are calm and quiet, it usually means they feel safe and comfortable with whatever is happening around them. One particular night stands out very clearly in my memory. It was one of those 15th days when our housekeeper was on her day off. My parents were upstairs, napping in their bedroom, and I was downstairs alone in the clean kitchen preparing dinner. The house felt still and hushed, with that soft evening light coming in through the windows and the familiar smell of cooking beginning to fill the air. The only company I had in the kitchen was my 2 little Shih Tzus. They had settled down right beside me, one on each side, so close that they were literally within an inch of my feet. I could feel their small bodies almost touching my legs every time I shifted my weight. They were both fast asleep at first, little balls of fur resting comfortably on the cool floor. As I cooked, focusing on the ingredients and the steps, I suddenly got the strange sensation that someone was standing behind me. It felt like someone was leaning in slightly, peeking over my shoulder to see what I was making, the way a curious person might do if they were trying to check the contents of a pot or pan. It was such a clear feeling that my body reacted before my mind had time to think. I tensed up, my heart giving a quick, sharp pound in my chest, and then my first hopeful thought was that maybe our housekeeper had come home early and was just trying to surprise me. We have that kind of playful relationship where small pranks and jokes are normal, and I have been guilty of teasing her many times in the past. It would not have been strange for her to try and get back at me with a quiet scare, creeping up behind me without saying anything. With that in mind, I immediately turned around, expecting to see her standing there with a grin on her face. But when I faced the doorway and looked around, there was no one there. The kitchen behind me was empty. The air felt normal, the light unchanged. No figure, no movement, just a plain, quiet space. What caught my attention next was the reaction of my dogs. They were no longer sleeping. Both of them were awake, their eyes bright, and their bodies alert. Instead of barking or acting frightened like they usually would when a stranger is nearby, they were wagging their tails at the doorway behind me. Their attention was fixed on that spot in a way that made it look like someone they liked or recognized was standing there. Their tails moved happily, that friendly, eager wag that they only reserved for people they were comfortable with, people who were familiar to them. That detail unsettled me more than the empty doorway itself. If there had truly been no one there, why were the dogs acting like they were greeting someone? Their behavior told me that, in their eyes, the doorway was not empty at all. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. The rational part of my mind told me it must just have been my imagination, or maybe a shift in air, or a trick of my body being tired, but the feeling of someone leaning over my shoulder had been too strong to dismiss easily. Still, my habit of liking to play pranks on people gave me another possible explanation. I thought that maybe our housekeeper had quietly slipped in through the outside door leading from the dirty kitchen, moved close enough to give me that sensation, and then quickly stepped away to hide, hoping to scare me or make me jump. It seemed exactly like the kind of payback she might think was funny after all the little tricks I had pulled on her over the years. Clinging to that more comforting idea, I called out her name, expecting to hear her voice answer from somewhere nearby. There was only silence. The house and the kitchen remained quiet except for the soft sounds of cooking and the faint tapping of my dogs' tails against the floor as they wagged. I called her name again, a bit louder this time, but still got no response. That was when I started walking slowly around, checking the nearby areas, peeking around corners, and looking out towards the dirty kitchen. I genuinely thought she was hiding somewhere, perhaps crouched down, trying not to laugh and waiting for the right moment to jump out. I was halfway through my small search, my mind still half in "this is a prank" mode, when the doorbell rang. The sound made me stop in my tracks. It was sudden and clear, echoing slightly through the quiet lower floor, and it was coming from the front of the house. For a moment, I thought that this was just an extension of the prank, that maybe she had gone all the way outside just to ring the bell and complete the joke. I walked to the door and opened it. There she was, standing outside with her things, looking tired in the usual way someone does after a long day off, and just as I saw her, I also noticed her taxi driving away from the front of the house. That simple detail, the taxi pulling away, told me that she had definitely just arrived. She had not been inside the house a few minutes earlier. There was no way she could have been playing around in the kitchen and then managed to slip outside unnoticed, get into a taxi, and somehow pretend to be arriving for the first time. My playful theory melted away, replaced by a cold, uneasy feeling that started in the pit of my stomach. Later, after she had come in and settled a bit, I told her what had happened while she was gone. I described the feeling of someone behind me, the empty doorway when I turned around, and most of all, the reaction of the dogs wagging their tails at something I could not see. I expected her to laugh, or at least look surprised, but instead her expression shifted into something more serious, a mix of concern and a kind of quiet understanding. That was when she decided to tell me something she had kept from me on purpose. She said that her father, who used to watch over our house sometimes when all of us were away, would often see a shadow walking towards the dirty kitchen. It was not a vague, one-time thing. She said he would, always, see it, regularly enough that it became something he grew used to. He never felt that it was threatening, just that it was there, moving in that direction again and again. She admitted that she had never told me about this before because she knew I would be scared, and she had wanted to spare me from that fear. Hearing her say this made the hairs on my arms stand up. My mind jumped back to the image of my dogs happily wagging their tails at the doorway, at the space that had looked empty to me. It started to make disturbing sense that they were reacting to something familiar, maybe the same presence her father used to see. She added that her father had always believed the entity was harmless, that it had been staying in our house along with other unseen presences for a long time, but only that particular one ever showed itself in any noticeable way. The fact that our dogs had not barked or acted afraid, but instead behaved like they were greeting someone they liked, lined up with the idea that this presence was not hostile, at least not towards them. Even so, the idea of something unseen sharing our home, quietly moving from place to place, made the atmosphere of the house feel different to me from then on. Some months later, her father passed away. His death was painful for her and for their family, and it also left a quiet emptiness in the parts of our lives where he used to appear, whether in person or in the stories she told. After he died, there were some small changes in how she arranged her routines at home. Whenever she was not sleeping in my room with me, she would sleep downstairs in the living room instead of in a separate bedroom. She would lay a mattress on the floor between the couch and the open space and bring my 2 dogs with her for company. She said that their presence made her feel less lonely and more secure, especially now that one of the people she loved most in the world was gone. The first night after her father passed away turned out to be anything but ordinary. She later told us what happened. That night, she had settled down on the mattress in the living room with the dogs beside her. The lights were off or very dim, and the house had that heavy silence that comes only very late into the night. At some point, she fell asleep. In the middle of the night, she woke up to the sensation of something soft hitting her face over and over in a light, rhythmic way. As her mind cleared, she realized that it was one of the dog's tails, wagging against her cheek. Half asleep and slightly annoyed by the disturbance, she sat up to move the dog away and get more comfortable. But as soon as she sat up and her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she froze. The scene in front of her did not make sense at first, but slowly it became terrifyingly clear. The 2 dogs were not just shifting in their sleep. They were both wide awake, their bodies alert, and their tails wagging happily. One of them was in the position he usually took when he was trying to lick someone's face or hands, his tongue moving in and out, but this time there was no one there. He was licking the air, aiming his affection at the wide, empty space between the mattress and the couch, his eyes focused on a spot as if someone invisible were kneeling there or bending down to play with him. The other dog was also reacting, tail swaying excitedly, as if reacting to gentle touches that she herself could not see. My housekeeper said that in that moment, she instantly knew who it was. She did not feel the heavy dread you might expect in a ghost story. Instead, she felt a strange, aching warmth. The first thought that came to her mind was that it was her father. She knew how much he loved dogs, especially our 2. Whenever he visited or watched the house, he would always make time to play with them, call out to them, pet their heads, scratch their backs, and talk to them as if they understood every word. The dogs, in turn, adored him. They would run to him, jump up, lick his hands, and wag their tails as if he was their favorite person. Seeing them now reacting in exactly the same way, in that small patch of empty air, made her feel certain that he had come back in some form, just to be near them again, to give them the same gentle love he always had. She did not scream or run. Instead, she watched in silence, letting herself feel that bittersweet mixture of sadness and comfort. Her father had passed on, but somehow, in that quiet living room, he still managed to visit the creatures he loved so much. There was another incident, during the day this time, that added yet another layer to what we believed was happening around us. One day, her brother had come over to our house to tend to the garden. He helped with the plants, the yard, and whatever needed doing outside. After finishing, he said goodbye and left. We watched him go, and everything seemed perfectly normal. About half an hour after he left, when we were back inside and things had settled into that peaceful stillness that often fills the house after chores are done, we suddenly heard a man's voice calling out clearly for our housekeeper. The voice was loud enough to be unmistakable, not like a vague whisper or a muffled sound you could explain away as something else. It called her name in a way that suggested familiarity and urgency, like someone who had just arrived and wanted to get her attention. Neither of my parents was home at that moment. They were both out, and I knew for a fact that they would not be back yet. Because of that, my first thought was that her brother must have returned for some reason, perhaps forgetting something or deciding to check on something he had done in the garden. I started to head towards the door, expecting to see him standing there when I opened it. Before I got very far, my housekeeper came into the room and asked me if I had heard it too. We looked at each other, both aware that the voice had been real, not imagined. It had been too clear to doubt. She picked up her phone and called her brother to ask if he had come back or if he was nearby. He answered and told her that he had gotten home about 10 minutes after leaving our house and had not returned since. Then, during that same conversation, he mentioned something that made our skin prickle. He said that just before he left our place earlier, he had the distinct impression that he saw their father walking towards our house. It had been just a glimpse, a feeling more than a fully clear sight, but it was strong enough for him to remember and mention. He told us not to be afraid, that he believed their father was just visiting, watching over us, checking on the home and the people he cared about. When my housekeeper ended the call, she admitted in a quiet voice that the man's voice we had heard calling her really did sound like her father's. The tone, the way he said her name, it all matched. After these experiences, it became harder and harder to deny that something beyond the ordinary was happening in our home. The presence that moved towards the dirty kitchen, the dogs reacting happily to an unseen playmate, the familiar voice calling from outside when no one physical was there, all of it formed a pattern that pointed to one conclusion: we were not alone, and not all of our unseen companions were strangers. Some, like her father, seemed to be part of the family still, woven into the daily life of the house even after death, appearing in small, subtle ways that reminded us of who they had been and how they had loved. The atmosphere of our home changed because of that realization, but not entirely in a frightening way. There was unease, yes, and moments of fear, especially when something happened suddenly, but there was also a quiet sense of being watched over, of sharing our space with presences who were not necessarily there to harm us. Now, whenever I am alone in the kitchen and feel that gentle sensation of someone standing behind me or see the dogs wagging their tails at what looks like nothing, I cannot help but think of our housekeeper's father and the old shadows that have moved through our home for years. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My mom once shared with me an experience that has never stopped haunting her thoughts, even after so many years. It happened when I was just 2 months old, so of course I have no memory of it. But the way she tells the story makes me feel as if I were there, small and fragile and completely unaware of how close something strange came to me. At that time, life in our house was simple. My dad was often away because of work, and my mom spent most of her days caring for me, moving between the bedroom and other parts of the house, her whole routine shaped around my feeding times and sleep. This was during a time before mobile phones, when long-distance communication meant relying on landlines and carefully timed calls. One day, my dad called from wherever he was staying for work. The phone was downstairs, and my mom was upstairs in the bedroom with me. I was sleeping peacefully on the bed, tiny and quiet, and she did what many mothers did in those days for extra safety. She placed pillows all around me, creating a soft barrier so that even if I moved a little, I would not roll off the edge. But at 2 months old, I could not even crawl, so she felt confident that I would still be exactly where she left me when she came back. With that in mind, she went downstairs to answer my dad's call. She remembers how she held the phone, how she greeted him, perhaps talking about small things, giving him updates about me, maybe laughing lightly about the little new things I had started doing. But while they were in the middle of their conversation, a sudden loud thump echoed from upstairs. The sound was so sharp and heavy that it jolted her heart, and at once her mind jumped to the worst possible thought: maybe I had fallen. She cut the conversation short and hurried up the stairs, her feet hitting each step faster than usual, her breath speeding up with every second. As she climbed, she listened carefully, expecting to hear my wails, because that is what any baby would do after a fall. But the strange thing was that she did not hear any crying at all. The silence was almost as frightening as a scream would have been. Confused and scared, she rushed into the bedroom, her eyes immediately going to the bed. What she saw there only deepened her panic. The bed was empty. The pillows were still there, forming that little protective nest she had made, but I was gone. No tiny body, no little form wrapped in a blanket. Just the space where I had been. Her heart dropped. In those first few seconds, wild thoughts must have raced through her mind. Had I somehow rolled away? Had someone taken me? Had I fallen? She quickly dropped to her knees and checked under the bed, and there, to her shock, she found me. I was lying under the bed, still sleeping, completely unharmed, resting comfortably on a pillow that had somehow made it down there with me. I was not crying, not even fussing. It was as if I had been gently placed there and tucked in, instead of having fallen with a loud thump that should have woken me up and made me scream. Until this day, it still puzzles her. The distance from the bed to the floor, the loud sound she heard, the fact that I was still peacefully asleep and cushioned by a pillow, all of it points away from the explanation of a baby simply rolling and falling. My mom has always believed that someone or something intervened to protect me, and she calls it my angel, a guardian presence that caught me, softened the fall, and laid me down safely under the bed. Sometimes she wonders why it happened that way, why the pillow was under me, why I did not cry, and the only answer that makes sense in her heart is that angels are real and sometimes they act in ways we cannot understand. Another strange experience happened years later, around 1990, when I was already in elementary school. It was summer break, one of those lazy afternoons when the air feels heavy and time moves slowly. Our home was quieter than usual because many people in the neighborhood were either resting, going out, or hiding from the heat. I was in my parents' room with my mom and my younger sister, all of us watching television together. The room had a familiar, comfortable feeling. The curtains probably let in soft light, the fan might have been running, and the TV glowed in front of us, filling the space with moving colors and background sound. My dad was at work, but we knew his routine well. He had this habit of dropping by the house at around 3 in the afternoon during breaks to bring us some snacks. It was a small, simple routine, but as kids we looked forward to it, because it meant treats, and seeing him in the middle of the day. As the clock slowly approached 3 o'clock, my mom told us that Dad would arrive any minute. There was a small feeling of excitement and expectation in the air. Then, suddenly, we heard 3 knocks on the door. The sound was clear and distinct, sharp enough to cut through the noise of the television. Mom, assuming it was my dad, hurried to the door, smiling and saying playfully, "Tadie!" as she opened it, as if revealing the surprise of his arrival. But when the door swung open, there was no one there. The space outside was empty. The corridor or area beyond the door was quiet. There was no sign of my father, no shadow, no footsteps walking away. The oddness of that moment settled over us. We knew my dad's knock very well. He had his own special way of doing it, knocking in a little rhythm, almost like a personal signature. The knock we had just heard was different, simple and straightforward, not like his at all. My mom stood at the doorway, confused, and we stayed close together, looking around, trying to see if maybe someone had played a prank on us. But there was no movement, no neighbor walking away, no children giggling in the distance, nothing that could explain what we heard. A few minutes later, my dad actually arrived. He came through the door with the usual snacks, expecting to find us in our normal positions. Instead, he found us huddled together, closer than usual, with a nervous air around us. "Surprised?" he asked. "What happened to you 3?" We told him about the knock, how we had heard it clearly, how Mom had gone to open the door expecting him, and how there had been no one there. Skeptical as he was, he simply shrugged it off and said it was nothing, maybe a trick of sound or maybe our imagination. But we knew what we had heard. That empty doorway stayed in our minds long after he brushed it aside. The strange happenings in our house did not come every day, but they seemed to unfold occasionally, like quiet reminders that something unseen might be sharing the space with us. By the time I was in my senior year of high school, I had experienced enough little oddities to feel uneasy when the house grew too quiet at night. One evening, I stayed up late to study for an exam. The pressure to do well was heavy on my shoulders, and I had my books and notes spread out around me, trying to absorb as much information as possible. My bed was positioned near the door, and I chose to study at the edge of the bed, close to that doorway, maybe because it made me feel less confined than sitting at a desk. The light in the room was on, bright enough to keep me awake, and the rest of the house was mostly dark and silent. My parents had gone to bed earlier, and the feeling of being the only one awake always made me a little more aware of small sounds. As I read and underlined and tried to focus, I heard something just outside the door. It sounded like a ball bouncing 3 times and then stopping. The sound was clear, not faint or muffled, and had a specific quality to it, that light, hollow echo that a ball makes when it hits the floor and jumps back up. I paused, my hand freezing over my notes, my ears straining to catch any more movement. Nothing followed the 3 bounces. No footsteps, no voices, just silence. I tried to picture what kind of ball could make that sound. It reminded me of a plastic ball, something similar to the Christmas balls we used as decorations, the kind of hollow ball that produces a sharper bouncing sound than a rubber one. I sat there, debating with myself. Some part of me wanted to get up, open the door, and see if a ball had rolled out from somewhere, or if someone was trying to play a trick on me. But another part of me, the part that remembered the knocks, the empty doorway, and my mother's stories, told me that maybe it was better not to look. I was afraid that if I opened the door, I might see someone, or something, standing there, or worse, that I would see nothing at all, and still feel that someone was near. After a few minutes of this inner argument, fear won. I decided not to open the door. Instead, I put my books aside, lay down on the bed, and chose to sleep with the lights on, as if the brightness could somehow keep whatever it was away. The next morning, when the sun was already in the sky and the house felt lighter and safer, I remembered what I had heard the night before. Curious now in the safety of daylight, I got up and walked to the door, looking around the area outside my room. That was when I saw a ball sitting at the bottom of the shoe rack. It was the exact kind of ball I had imagined the night before, hollow and plastic, like the ones you might find as part of Christmas decorations or simple toys. My heart skipped a beat. I picked it up and held it in my hand, then, without really thinking, I let it drop and bounce 3 times on the floor. The sound it made was exactly the same as the sound I had heard outside my door. There was no mistake. It made that same clear thump 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 pattern and then stopped, just as it had the previous night. But I knew that the ball could not have bounced on its own. It had been sitting near the shoe rack. There was no one awake to have thrown it. The realization sent a soft chill down my spine. I later told my mom about it, explaining the sound, the fear I had felt, and the ball I had found and tested. She listened and then gently told me that next time I experienced anything like that, I should pray. She reminded me that on that particular night, they had gone to bed early and had slept straight through, meaning neither she nor my dad could have been the source of the noise. Life in our house was not just about strange sounds and unseen touches, of course. It was also made up of deep emotions, losses, and changes that shaped us. After my grandpa died, something shifted in our family. My dad joined the Sacred Heart of Jesus organization in our diocese, perhaps searching for a deeper connection with faith and community during his time of grief. Over time, he did not just remain a member. He eventually became the president of the organization, which meant he was even more immersed in prayers, devotions, and church activities. Back when my grandpa was still alive, we had a household rule that we were not allowed to have dogs. It was his preference, and we respected it. But after he passed away, my parents felt that the time had come to finally bring dogs into our lives. Maybe they wanted new sources of joy, new small hearts to care for, or maybe they simply felt that the house needed more life and energy. We were blessed with more than just one dog when our mama dog gave birth, and we suddenly had a little pack of puppies to love and raise. Their presence brought happiness, warmth, and noise into the house, but they also became unexpected witnesses to things we could not see. One afternoon, the dogs started acting very strangely at the back of our house. That area faced the wall of my grandpa's sister's house, which stood close by. Her house was larger than ours, a 2-story structure with 4 big rooms on the 2nd floor. Those upper rooms had been empty for many years, ever since my cousin's family had moved to the United States. Only the 1st floor of that house was being used. The 2nd floor remained dark and still, the windows rarely opened, the room silent and untouched. Its emptiness gave the house a creepy feeling, like something was frozen in time upstairs. To make things worse, after my grandpa passed away, a relative of theirs who had struggled with depression and drugs committed suicide in that very house, hanging himself in the living room. The knowledge that such a tragic event had taken place there only added to the heavy atmosphere around it. That afternoon, the dogs gathered at the back of our house, facing the wall of that house, and began barking frantically. Their barking was not the normal, playful kind. It was sharp, urgent, repetitive, and filled with a nervous energy. Their bodies were tense, their fur might have been standing on end, and they refused to move away from that spot. They stared fixedly towards a particular area, as if they were seeing something or someone we could not. My dad, who was usually skeptical about anything supernatural, tried to calm them down at first. He called to them, perhaps tried to move them away or distract them, but the dogs kept on barking, their eyes still locked on the unseen target. There was something about their reaction that shook him enough to step out of his usual rational mindset. Even though he was not the type to immediately jump to ghostly explanations, that day he made a different choice. He went to our altar and took the holy water, a small container that had been blessed and kept there for religious use. He then went back towards the back area of the house and began to pray the chaplet of the Divine Mercy, a prayer he had grown closer to after joining the Sacred Heart of Jesus organization. As he prayed and sprinkled the holy water, asking for protection and mercy, something changed. One by one, the dogs stopped barking. Their tension seemed to relax. Their bodies lowered, their ears settled, and they eventually calmed down, as if whatever had upset them had moved away or been pushed back. That change, coming right after the prayers and holy water, left a strong impression on us. For my dad, it was one of the few times his skepticism was challenged enough for him to respond with faith and ritual rather than dismissal. Through all of this, our house remained itself, both in structure and in feeling. On the outside, it kept its somewhat gloomy appearance. Maybe it was the way the light hit its walls, the way shadows gathered near certain corners, or the quiet tone of the rooms when no one was talking. Even now, it has never fully lost that slightly heavy atmosphere. The house is still not blessed, though my family has been planning to have it blessed this year. Perhaps they hope that with a formal blessing, prayers spoken in every room and holy water sprinkled carefully over doorways and corners, the house will finally feel lighter, more peaceful, more fully claimed by the living and protected from whatever has been moving quietly in its halls all these years. Until then, we continue to live in it as we always have, sharing our days with faith, memories, and the unspoken awareness that we might not be alone, and that sometimes, in the quiet moments, old stories and unseen presences brush gently against our lives. My mum has told me this story so many times that I almost feel like I remember it myself, even though I was far too young to have any real memory of it. She says that when I was only a few weeks old, I was in and out of the hospital so often that the nurses already knew my name. I was a sickly baby, always weak, always cold, and the doctors were afraid that I might not survive. It was a dark, wet month when I was born, the kind of time when the sky is covered with heavy clouds for days and days, and barely any sunlight reaches the ground. I was not getting enough vitamins from natural sunlight, and back then they did not have the same kinds of treatments and equipment easily available for everyone, especially for families like ours. Mum says I would sometimes turn a strange bluish color, my skin cold to the touch as if the warmth had left my little body and refused to come back. My parents were not rich. We were not the poorest of the poor, but we also did not have the money to afford all the extra things that might have helped, alternative medicines, special prescriptions, or electric heaters that could keep the room warm through the night. They did the best they could with blankets and their own hands, always trying to keep me warm, but many nights they would lie awake, watching me breathe, hoping that my tiny chest would keep rising and falling until morning. One night, when I was especially sick, my parents got so worried that they rushed me to the hospital again. By that point, going to the hospital was not new to them, but each time felt just as heavy and frightening as the last. They arrived late, tired and anxious, and the staff placed them in a small room, the kind of shared room that hospitals often use when they are busy. There was an elderly person already staying in that room, someone who was also a patient, lying in the other bed. The nurse told my parents that all the doctors were currently doing overtime, and that they would need to wait before anyone could see me. It was the kind of answer that feels both normal and terrifying at the same time. On one hand, you understand that doctors are busy and that emergencies come in all the time. On the other hand, when it is your child lying in that hospital bed, every minute feels too long. My parents pulled up chairs and sat on either side of my small crib or bed, watching me closely. I was so weak at that point that even my crying did not have much strength in it. They wanted to stay alert, ready for the doctor the moment he or she walked through the door, but they were also exhausted. They had been carrying the weight of fear for weeks, maybe months, and the body can only handle so much worry before it gives into sleep, even if the mind is still clinging to consciousness. My mum remembers that night being very quiet. The hospital sounds, the beeping machines, the footsteps in the hallway, the distant rolling of carts, all faded slowly into the background as the hours stretched on. The elderly person in the other bed lay silently, and the room seemed to shrink around them into a small island of dim light and restless waiting. My parents sat there, one on each side of my bed, and eventually, without meaning to, they both fell asleep. They did not intend to. They wanted to stay awake and watch over me, but their bodies were drained. Their heads must have slowly drooped, their eyes closed, and for a short while they surrendered to exhaustion. At some point during the night, they were awakened by the sound of me crying. My cry was what pulled them out of sleep and back into awareness. Mum says she woke up with that sharp, familiar panic in her chest, the instinctive reaction of a mother who hears her baby in distress. She immediately leaned over and picked me up. When she touched me, the first thing she noticed was that my body felt warm. Not dangerously hot, not feverish, but warm in a healthy way, completely different from the clammy, cold feeling I had so often. For a moment she was confused. Before they had dozed off, she remembers worrying about how cold I felt. It had been one of the main reasons they brought me to the hospital. Now, suddenly, my skin was soft and warm, and my color looked better. She did not understand what had happened. They had been asleep. No one had woken them. No one had shaken her shoulder and said it was time to see the doctor. She looked around, still holding me, trying to figure out what she had missed. It was then that the elderly woman in the other bed spoke up. She had been awake and watching, and she told my mum, in a calm voice, "You're so lucky the doctor was able to see your daughter that quickly. He didn't want to wake you up because he knew you were tired. He left about 5 minutes ago." My mum stared at her, even more confused than before. She asked the woman what she meant. The patient explained that a man dressed all in white had come into the room. He had stood by my bed, looked me over, checked on me, and then turned to look at my parents, who were sleeping on either side. According to her, he had said that they should keep resting, that they were tired and needed sleep, and that everything would be okay. Then he had left quietly. What puzzled my mum even more was that she knew who their regular doctor was, and she knew what she looked like. Their doctor was a woman, not a man. The hospital staff also had a certain way of dressing. The nurses wore uniforms, the doctors wore suits or dresses, especially the women. It was not like some places where doctors always wore white coats. Here, a doctor dressed in all white from head to toe was something unusual. Still confused, my mom told the elderly woman that their doctor was a woman, not a man, and that she had been expecting a lady, not someone else. The elderly patient shook her head gently and replied, "Well, he was wearing all white and he looked over your daughter and he turned to you and told you to keep resting, then he left." She sounded sure and calm, as if she had just watched an ordinary doctor's visit, nothing strange at all. But to my mum, it felt like a piece of a puzzle that did not fit anywhere. Just a few minutes after that conversation, their regular doctor finally arrived. She came into the room looking normal, not rushed, and not as if she had just been there. She checked me over, examined my condition, and then told my parents that I was going to be okay. She said there was no longer any need for them to stay, that my condition had improved, and that the danger had passed for the moment. My temperature, my color, my breathing, everything was much better. It was as if something had turned around quietly while they were asleep. My parents were relieved, of course. They thanked her, listened to her instructions, and prepared to go. But my mum had that other conversation still turning in her mind, the one with the elderly woman, who claimed a man in white had come to see me, warned me, and told them to rest. To this day, my mum is convinced that whoever that man was, he was not an ordinary doctor. She believes it was her dad, my grandfather, watching over me in a way that only a loving spirit would. Her father had already passed away by then, and she missed him deeply. She often felt his absence at important moments in her life, especially when she became a mother herself, and wished he could see his grandchild. When she tells the story, she says it with a kind of quiet certainty that is hard to argue with. For her, there is no doubt. The timing, the way the stranger behaved, the sudden change in my condition, and the fact that neither she nor my dad woke up while this doctor was supposedly there, it all feels like more than coincidence to her. The man in white did not match the usual appearance of the hospital doctors. He did not act like someone rushing between patients. He acted like someone who knew us, who cared about us, and who wanted my parents to get some rest while he took care of me. I have told her that it sounds a bit silly, and I say that not because I want to hurt her feelings, but because I myself do not really believe in ghosts. I have always tried to think of logical explanations first. Maybe the elderly woman was half asleep and imagined it. Maybe there was a visiting doctor or a trainee who happened to wear all white that day and did not want to disturb my parents. Maybe the warmth in my body came from my fever breaking on its own. I try to list these possibilities, to bring some kind of rational order into the story. But every time I do, my mum shakes her head and refuses to let go of what she believes. The more I look at the details, the more I understand why. It is not just the strange visit in the hospital that makes her feel this way. It is also the dates that surround my birth. My birthday is July 13th. On its own, that is just a normal date, one day in the middle of the year. But in my family, those days around it are full of meaning. My grandfather's death was on July 14th, the very next day. He died before I was born, but close enough that his death and my birth are almost side by side on the calendar. To make it even more striking, July 12th was his wedding anniversary with my grandmother. So in 3 days, July 12th, July 13th, and July 14th, you have their anniversary, my birth, and his death, all lined up like stepping stones. For my mom, this is not just a coincidence. She looks at those dates and sees a kind of connection, a circle of love and loss and new life. She believes that because of those dates, both her parents are watching over me. She says that my grandfather would not let me die, not when my life had started right in the middle of those days that mattered so much to him and my grandmother. When she talks about it, there is a soft glow in her eyes, a mixture of sadness and comfort. She missed her father deeply, and the idea that he visited me in the hospital when I was too weak to help myself gives her peace. It gives meaning to a time that was otherwise filled with fear and worry, and the harsh reality of not having enough money for everything they needed. Believing that he was there, dressed in white, placing some invisible warmth into my body, is her way of understanding how I pulled through when things were so dark. Even if I stand on the other side of the belief line, even if I still find it hard to accept the idea of spirits walking through hospital hallways, I cannot deny that the story has its own kind of power. Sometimes I think about that little baby that I once was, lying in a cold hospital room, surrounded by worry and shadowed by statistics that did not look very hopeful. I imagine my parents dozing off by my side, exhausted but unwilling to leave me. I imagine an elderly patient watching the door, seeing someone enter dressed in white, bend over my bed, and then quietly tell my parents to keep resting. I imagine that same someone placing a warmth inside me that science cannot easily measure. Whether that figure was my grandfather, an angel, a doctor, or a kind face her tired mind invented, I will never know for certain. But I do know that after that night I got better. I survived those early, dangerous weeks. I grew up. I lived long enough to hear this story many times and to question it, and also to see how important it is to my mother's heart. Maybe that is the strangest part of all. It does not really matter whether I personally believe in ghosts or not. What matters is that for my mom, it was real, and that belief has stayed with her as a source of comfort. Every year when July comes around, when the air feels a certain way and the dates line up again, 12, 13, 14, she remembers her father, her mother, and that night in the hospital. She looks at me and smiles in a way that says, "You were never alone, not then, not now." And even if I still tell her that it sounds silly, a small part of me wonders if, somewhere in that thin space between the living and the dead, two people who loved their family very much really are watching over us. And if for one night, long ago, they stepped a little closer to make sure that a tiny, fragile life did not slip away. 3 years ago, I had one of the strangest and most unsettling experiences of my life, and it all started very simply, with a sleepover at my friend May's apartment. At the time, nothing about her place seemed unusual from the outside. It was just another small apartment in a regular building, with narrow hallways, a simple front door, and basic furniture. I had decided to spend the night there because we were close friends. We liked staying up late to talk, and it was more convenient to sleep over than to go home very late. I did not think for a moment that anything unusual or paranormal would happen. On my first night at her place, I slept on the double-deck bed, and although I did not sleep very well, I did not immediately connect that to anything strange. I just thought it was a new place, a different bed, a slightly different feeling in the air, the kind of thing that naturally makes it harder to fall into a deep sleep. However, once I went back to my own apartment afterward, I realized that something had changed in a way I could not explain. I began to have trouble sleeping even in my own bed, in my own familiar space. It was as if some part of the uneasiness from May's apartment had followed me home. At first, I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was nothing, that it was just my imagination, or that my body was adjusting to stress or tiredness. But the more I tried to brush it off, the more small, strange things began to happen whenever May came to visit me. Whenever May would come over to my apartment after that first sleepover, little anomalies would happen around us, small events that were hard to dismiss once they started to add up. She would sometimes go into the kitchen to wash the dishes after we ate, and she told me that more than once, after she had turned her back and stepped away from the sink, she felt and heard something tapping the dishes behind her. It was not just the sound of a plate settling or water dripping. It was a light, deliberate tap, as if someone had taken a finger or a small object and tapped the dish on purpose. She was the kind of person who did not get scared easily, but it still made her stop and stare at the sink, wondering who or what had done it. Once, while we were sitting together, our attention completely absorbed in some conversation, something tapped lightly on the plastic table that stood a few feet away from where we were sitting. The sound was clear enough to cut through our discussion. We both turned to look at the table at the same time, startled by the sudden noise. For me, it was only surprising, but for May it was frightening because she had already begun to associate her apartment, and now my place too, with unusual activity. Another time, I went to the comfort room while she was lying on my double-deck bed. The apartment was quiet except for normal city sounds faintly coming from outside. While I was inside the comfort room, I heard a small object hit the wooden part of the bed. It was not very loud, but I could tell from the sound that something solid had struck the wood. I did not rush out immediately, but when I finally left the comfort room, May looked annoyed and upset. She told me that while I was away, she had almost been hit by a small stone or object that seemed to come out of nowhere. It had struck near her, close enough to make her flinch. I tried to think of some normal explanation. Maybe something had fallen from a shelf or rolled off somewhere, but there was nothing around that made sense. These odd little events continued to pile up, and slowly the fun, casual feeling of our visits began to be overshadowed by a quiet sense of dread. Even so, I agreed to sleep over at May's apartment a second time. Looking back now, I wonder why I did. Maybe it was because I wanted to prove to myself that nothing was wrong, that everything could still be normal. Or maybe it was because May and I were still close and it seemed awkward to refuse. Whatever the reason, I went back there, and that second night turned out to be one of the most unforgettable paranormal experiences I have ever had. Before I describe that night, it is important to say that I did not actually see the child we later learned about. I did not physically see a ghost or a figure standing in front of me. Everything I experienced came through sensation and later confirmation from someone else, which somehow made it both easier and harder to accept. That evening, May and I did our usual things at her apartment. We talked, we laughed, we ate, and we tried to act like two normal friends just sharing a night. But beneath my laughter, I was troubled. I had started to feel that something from her apartment had attached itself to me after the first night, something that followed me home and disturbed my sleep. I was angry with her, even though part of me knew it was not really her fault. In my frustration and fear, I blamed her for the thing that seemed to have taken an interest in me, as if she had invited me into a place that was quietly dangerous without telling me first. Those thoughts were in the back of my mind as we prepared to sleep. May had her own spot, and I was alone on the double deck where, as I would later learn, a male child had died of sickness. At that time, I did not know the full story, only that something felt deeply wrong about that bed and that room. I lay down and tried to sleep, but my anger, my fear, and the strange heaviness in the air around me made it almost impossible. As I lay there, half awake and half asleep, I began to feel something strange on my right side. It started with a slight oddness in the air, like a patch of cold that did not match the rest of the room. The more I paid attention to it, the more I realized that it was not just a simple breeze or a change in temperature. It was an odd, focused coldness, like a shape of cold air resting in one place. Out of curiosity and a kind of nervous bravery, I reached out with my hand to feel it. What I felt made my stomach drop. The coldness was not random. It had a form. It felt horizontal, as if something was lying next to me on the bed, even though the space looked empty to my eyes. When I traced it in my mind, it seemed to be about 2 feet tall, the size of a small child lying stretched out. But what unsettled me the most was the way it seemed to extend through the wall, as if the body or presence continued past the physical boundary of the room. My mind struggled to understand what this could mean. It felt like lying next to an invisible child who was not limited by the solid structure around us. As I realized what I was feeling, my pride began to fade. Before this, I had tried to be strong, tried to dismiss my fear, tried to act as if nothing could really touch me. But in that moment, I was genuinely frightened. I felt completely vulnerable, lying there beside an invisible, cold, horizontal presence that seemed to be sharing the bed with me. I could not see it, but I could sense its shape and size so clearly that it was almost worse than if I had seen a faint outline. My fear finally pushed me to act, and I called out to May, asking her to join me on the bed. I did not want to be alone with that feeling any longer. When she climbed up and lay beside me, I hoped the presence would disappear, that it would leave when it realized I was no longer alone. But it did not go away. Even with her next to me, the strange presence stayed. On top of that, I began to feel something else, another coldness, this time not beside me but on my legs. It felt like something small and cold was sitting on my legs, pressing down in certain spots. I had covered half of myself with a sheet, trying to shield my body and comfort my mind, but the fabric did nothing to stop the sensation. The feeling of weight and coldness resting on my legs was so disturbing that I could not relax. I moved, I shifted, I tried to ignore it, but it stayed. That night, sleep was not rest for me. It was a long, tense stretch of time filled with quiet fear and constant awareness of a presence that seemed to want to be near me. After a week of enduring strange sensations, restless sleep, and unexplained small events, May and I decided that we needed help. It was not enough anymore to shrug it off as imagination or coincidence. The way the feeling had followed me home, the tapping sounds, the coldness on my bed, and the sense that something had chosen me, all made us feel that we should talk to someone who understood these things better. We decided to go to a medium, someone who was known in the area to have the ability to sense spirits and energies beyond the physical. We traveled to his home, our nerves tight and our minds full of questions. He used cards as one of his tools, laying them out in front of him and reading them in a way that seemed more serious and focused than any regular card game. As he studied the cards and concentrated, he began to tell us things that made my heart beat faster. He told us that a male child had died of sickness in the very room where my friend now lived, the same room where I had slept on the double-deck bed, the same place where I had felt the presence beside me. The child, he said, was still there. According to the medium, the spirit had noticed me and found me to be a nice person, gentle enough and open enough that he felt drawn to me. That was why, the medium explained, the child had latched himself to me. It was not a random haunting. It was a kind of attachment. He also described the spirit in more detail, saying that the child had bulging eyes, a feature that made the image in my mind even more haunting. Then he told us something that made me feel both exposed and oddly validated. He said that as we were traveling to his house, while we were riding the tricycle to get there, the spirit of the child had been with us. He said he had seen the boy alongside us, as if he had tagged along, curious and unwilling to let go. It was chilling to imagine this unseen child sitting with us in the tricycle, watching us worry about him, maybe not fully understanding what we were trying to do. The medium told me that he would do something to free me from this ghost, to cut the attachment that had formed between us. He said he would take care of it, that he knew how to handle spirits like this, especially those of children who had died too young and were still clinging to the world. He spoke calmly, without drama, which made me want to believe him. Before we left, he gave me a prayer, a specific set of words to say whenever I felt in danger or whenever I sensed the child's presence again. The prayer was meant to protect me, to remind me of higher powers watching over me, and to gently guide the spirit away. For a while, just knowing that I had that prayer brought me some comfort. It felt like a small shield I could carry, something I could use any time fear crept close. Unfortunately, with the passing of time, I eventually lost the paper where the prayer was written. I do not remember exactly when or how it happened. Maybe it got misplaced during a move, or maybe it was thrown away by accident. All I know is that at some point, when I went looking for it, it was gone. Even so, the memory of that time, of the child who lay beside me on that bed and sat on my legs as a patch of cold, and of the medium who saw him riding with us, has never really left me. I have never really believed in ghosts or other beings that move among the living, and even now, when I look back at everything I have experienced, a part of me still tries to tell myself that there must be some other explanation, that my mind is just playing tricks on me. But I also cannot deny that since I was very young, I have been seeing and feeling things that are not usual, things that most people around me do not see at all. It started when I was about 9 years old. I remember standing under a mango tree, feeling lonely and wishing that I had someone special who would understand me completely. I did not think of it as anything dangerous. I just closed my eyes and asked for a special friend, not realizing that maybe someone, or something, might actually hear me. I did not see anything right that moment, but the next day my mother's friend came over and told my mama that there was something wrong with me, that my energy, or my aura looked different somehow. My mother got worried, and instead of bringing me to a regular doctor, they decided to ask an albulario, a traditional healer, to help me. I was young and did not really understand what they were doing. I remember herbs, prayers, maybe smoke, and strange words I could not follow. They said they were closing something or removing something from me, and from that point on, things did change, but not in a way that made my life easier. At first, after that, it was not so visual. I could not see clear figures or shapes yet, but I could sense that there was something wrong with certain places. Whenever I entered a room or an area that had a heavy history or bad energy, I could feel it in my chest, like a pressure that made it hard to breathe, or in the back of my neck, like a cold hand resting there. Sometimes my head would hurt, or my mood would suddenly change when I walked into a place. I felt the negativity of that area as if it was trying to stick to my skin. I did not have words for it when I was younger, so I just kept it all inside and tried to act normal. But as the years passed, things became harder to ignore and harder to accept. What started as a vague feeling slowly turned into something much clearer and much more frightening. I began to see things, not just sense them. I discovered that sometimes I could see people who were going to die soon. It was not like a movie where you see a bright sign or hear a loud voice. It was more like seeing an image, a flash, or a scene in my mind when I looked at them, something that showed them in a hospital bed, or lying somewhere still, or surrounded by grieving people. I saw the deaths of some of my relatives before they happened. I would see them in my mind looking pale and weak, as if their life had already left them, and then weeks or months later, I would hear that they had passed away. I also saw the deaths of some of my friends, and even people I was not close to or not related to at all. It was like watching a future that I did not want to see. Sometimes I tried to warn people gently, telling them to take care of their health or to be careful, but how could I tell them directly? "I think I saw you dying." They would only think I was crazy or trying to scare them. On top of that, I began to see images of people who do not exist anymore, souls that are still lingering, still playing among the living, walking through spaces as if the world has not moved on without them. These images came at random times, sometimes in the corner of my eye, sometimes in full view, sometimes in busy places, and sometimes in the quiet moments when I least expected them. Last June 2014, we had an outreach program in Baylor, and that trip gave me one of the clearer examples of how this gift, or curse, as I sometimes call it, works in my life. Our group was staying in the house of one of the Kagawad in that Burundi. It was a simple place, with a session hall-like area where we could talk, work, and relax. That night, we were packing the goodies we would distribute for the outreach, lining up items, putting them into bags, and talking as we worked. Some of us were also having a drinking session at the same time, laughing, teasing each other, and trying to enjoy the night. In the middle of that normal activity, something strange happened. An image of a boy passed right in front of me. At first, I thought it was just the caretaker's child or some local kid wandering through the hall. It was so quick and natural that I almost brushed it off, but then I followed him with my eyes and noticed something that made my blood run cold. His feet were not touching the ground. He was moving smoothly, gliding instead of walking. My whole body tensed. I immediately asked the people around me if they had seen what I saw, but they all said no, and many of them laughed at me, thinking I was making a joke or just being dramatic. I did not find it funny. I knew what I had seen. Someone else in the group, someone who has the same kind of burden that I carry, quietly told me that he felt the presence of something passing as well, even if he did not see it as clearly as I did. That was enough to confirm that I was not imagining it. After that, our friends, who had a mix of fear and nervous laughter in their eyes, decided to leave the session hall. They did not want to stay in that place anymore after hearing that there was something unseen moving around us. The next incident happened in November of the same year, during my first hike in Norzagare. It was supposed to be a fun experience, a physical challenge and a chance to be close to nature, far from the noise of city life and I hoped, far from the strange things I usually sensed. Our group had climbed up the mountain, enjoyed the view, and then started making our way down. Somewhere along the way, we lost track of the trail. The path that had seemed clear suddenly seemed to disappear beneath our feet, and the trees and rocks all started to look the same. One of my friends tried to find our way back, moving ahead of us a bit to look for signs of the correct trail. She was walking ahead alone when suddenly, I saw an unknown image following her. It was not solid and clear like a real person, but it was not just a shadow either. It had a shape, a presence, and it was moving right behind her. Instinctively, I ran towards her as fast as I could, my heart pounding, not really sure what I was planning to do but just feeling that I needed to get closer and see if the thing would stay. As soon as I got near her, the image disappeared. It was like it had dissolved into the air the moment I entered its space. We kept walking, still confused about the direction, and every time we started to lose the trail again, the image kept showing itself. It did not feel like it was trying to harm us. Instead, I got the strange feeling that it was pointing us to the right direction, leading us down towards the town. I hesitated to tell my friends what I was seeing, not wanting to scare them any more than they already were. But the repeated appearances of the image disturbed me so much that I could not keep it to myself. I finally told them that I saw something and that it seemed to be guiding us. The girl who had been followed by the image then admitted that she heard a voice in her head or near her, pointing her to go in the right direction. Hearing that made all of us feel a mix of fear and gratitude. We were scared because we knew something not human was involved, but we were thankful that we eventually found the correct track back down to the town. If we had not listened, or if we had ignored the signs, we might have stayed lost much longer. Another strong memory is from March 21, 2015, when I went to my boss's birthday party in Tarlac. It was a happy occasion, full of food, laughter, and celebration. After the party, instead of heading home right away, we all slept at her aunt's house, which was nearby. The next morning, after we had breakfast, I went inside the room where our bags were placed to get my toothbrush. The room was small and full of personal things, giving the impression of a lived-in, family space. I picked up my toothbrush, went to brush my teeth, and came back to the room to put it away. As I stepped inside again, I saw an image of an old lady. She was standing there, looking at me, and she asked for help to change her clothes in the other room. She did not look scary or threatening. She looked like an ordinary elderly woman who needed a hand, and I assumed that she was their Lola, the grandmother of my boss's family. I smiled at her, and then stepped out of the room again. I did not give her a hand because I saw my boss's cousin near the area and I thought he would be the one to help her. I did not think much of it at first. It felt like one of those simple, everyday moments when an older person asks for assistance. Later, on our way back to Manila, I casually asked my boss what the name of the old lady in that room was. I described her as clearly as I could, the way she looked, how she moved, how she asked for help. My boss stared at me and asked if I was serious. I nodded, confused by her reaction, and repeated the details of the person I had seen. That was when she told me that the only old lady in their family is her Lola, and that no other old lady lives in their house, and her Lola had not been there in that room at that time or in that way. There was no one else who matched the woman I had described. Hearing that made my whole body go cold. The only word that came out of my mouth was a curse, a short, shocked reaction to realizing that the person I had seen and smiled at was not someone the family recognized as living. Up to now, I still wonder who that old lady was and why she appeared to me asking for help. I still say that I do not believe in ghosts, because believing would mean accepting that my life is tied to something I cannot control or fully understand, but at the same time, I cannot pretend that these things have not happened. I keep having these experiences, seeing things that others do not, feeling things that make no sense, catching glimpses of deaths before they happen, and talking to people who, according to everyone else, are not there. I do not know if this is a gift, a curse, or just some strange part of me that I will never fully understand, but it continues to follow me, no matter how much I try to live like everyone else. Before I finally decided to transfer and live permanently where my husband was, there was a period of my life when I was raising my eldest son with the help of my mom. Back then, our days had a simple routine. My husband was away, my parents were working, and most of my time was spent at home with my little boy and my grandmother, who was our steady, quiet companion in the house. It was a modest home, the kind where you could hear someone moving in another room, the kind where sounds from the street drifted in through the windows in the evening. Life was not perfect, but it was familiar and comforting in its own way. I had settled into a rhythm with my son, caring for him from morning until night, changing his diapers, feeding him, bathing him, and watching him grow and learn little things day by day. One evening, around 6 o'clock, something happened that started a chain of experiences I still think about to this day. It was already getting dark outside, that in-between time when the light from the sky is fading and the artificial lights around the house begin to glow. I was in the bathroom, washing my son after he had finished pooping. It was part of our usual routine. I had the bathroom door open because I liked being able to see and hear what was going on outside, and also because it made the small room feel less stuffy. The light inside the bathroom was enough to see clearly, and the sound of water running from the faucet mixed with my son's little movements, and the faint noises from other parts of the house. I was focused on making sure he was clean and comfortable, gently washing him and talking to him the way mothers do when they want to keep their children calm. As I was washing him, I noticed that he was not looking at me or at the water. Instead, his attention was fixed on the bathroom door. His eyes were wide and fully focused on something beyond the doorway, as if something had caught his attention there. At first, I thought he might be looking at a shadow, or maybe he had seen one of our family members pass by. I paused for a moment and followed his gaze toward the doorway, but from where I stood, there was nothing unusual. Just the open door, the usual view of the hallway outside, and the soft lighting from the other parts of the house. I felt a little uneasy, so I asked him gently, "What is it that you see?" He did not answer with words. He just stared and pointed toward the door. I tried again, a bit more specific this time. "Did you see someone?" I asked. For a moment he kept quiet, and then, in the simple voice of a 2-year-old, he finally said one word. "Man." The way he said it was calm, not frightened, but very sure. That made my heart skip a beat. I looked at him and repeated for confirmation. "Is there a man at the door?" He nodded yes, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, as if he was only telling me what I should already know. I felt a chill, but I tried to stay calm for his sake. I went closer, trying to look into his eyes, almost as if I hoped that by looking into his pupils, I might see a reflection of whatever it was he was seeing. Sometimes you can see what a person is looking at reflected in their eyes, and I hoped that maybe I could catch a glimpse of this man. But there was nothing in his eyes except my own reflection and the soft bathroom light. Trying not to show any fear, I told my son, "There is no one at the door." I wanted to reassure both him and myself with those words, even if a part of me did not feel completely convinced. I finished washing him as quickly but gently as I could, lifting him up and drying him with a towel. When we stepped out of the bathroom, he was reluctant to move past the door. He kept tugging on me, holding me tightly as we walked by the doorway, as if he was afraid that something might grab him if he got too close. I had to practically guide him with extra reassurance just to get out of that area. Later, when we were in a more relaxed setting, I told my grandmother, who had been our only companion in the house at that time, about what happened. I explained how my son had stared at the door, pointed, and said there was a man. My grandmother, however, just shrugged it off. She seemed uninterested or simply unwilling to take it seriously. She did not say much except something like, "Kids imagine things," and went on with what she was doing. I could not tell if she truly did not believe it or if she simply did not want to think about it too deeply. When my parents arrived home from work that evening, I told them the same story. I described how their grandson had acted, how he pointed to the door and insisted there was a man there. They listened, but their reaction was similar to my grandmother's. They told me that it was probably just the child's imagination. In their minds, young children make up stories or see things that are not really there because of their developing minds. That explanation might have comforted them, but it did not sit quite right with me. My son was only 2 years old. At that age, children still cannot distinguish what is paranormal and what is normal. They do not yet have enough concepts, fears, and stories built into their minds to easily invent ghosts or unseen men by the door. That thought stayed with me long after our conversation ended. Our family is religious, so we hold the prayer of the Holy Rosary every night. It is a routine that brings us some sense of peace and habit at the end of the day. We gather in the living room, sometimes a little tired from work and chores, but always willing to give that time to prayer. On the night after my son saw the man at the bathroom door, we were in the middle of our usual rosary. My parents were leading the prayer, beads in hand, voices soft but steady. My son, like many children, did not pay much attention to the prayer itself. Instead, he was playing nearby, moving his small toys around or just walking around the living room, occasionally glancing at us. The house felt quiet and serious in that prayerful way, the kind of calm that usually makes me feel safe. Then, something changed. While we were still in the middle of the prayer, my son suddenly stopped playing. It was as if something had caught his eye or his attention again. He froze for a moment and stared at the space that divided our living room and the dining area. It was just an ordinary section of the house, an open area between two parts of the home where you could stand and see both spaces at once. There was nothing physically unusual there, no furniture that would draw attention, no decoration that was new. But my son's focus was locked on that space. Before I could ask him what was wrong, he suddenly rushed towards me. He shouted, "Mama!" in a frightened tone, hugged me very tightly, and then pointed toward that same empty space he had been staring at. His small body pressed against me, and I could feel that he was truly scared, not pretending or playing. The prayers around us stopped for a moment as everyone noticed his sudden panic. My heart pounded. I wrapped one arm around him and looked toward the area he was pointing at, trying to see any sign of someone standing there, anything at all that might explain his fear. But once again, my eyes saw only open space and the familiar shape of our home. My dad, who I had always thought of as somewhat skeptical about these kinds of stories, reacted in a way that surprised me. Without saying much, he stood up, went to our small altar, and took the holy water we kept there. Then he walked toward the space my son had pointed to and sprinkled the holy water in that direction. As he did so, he prayed silently, perhaps asking for protection, cleansing, or peace for our home. It was a serious and deliberate action, and in that moment I realized that even if he claimed to be skeptical, a part of him also respected the possibility that something unseen was there. After that, we finished the rosary, but the mood in the room had shifted. There was a lingering sense of unease, mixed with hope that whatever had been bothering my son would now leave us alone. The next day, my son developed a fever. He was warm to the touch, his cheeks flushed, his body restless and uncomfortable. I remembered what people in our culture often said, especially in the Philippines. They say children are highly susceptible to the paranormal because their minds and hearts are more open to things that adults ignore or cannot perceive. They also say that usually, children get a fever after seeing things. In Cebuano, they call it bayag. It is a word used when someone is affected physically after an encounter with something unseen or after being admired too strongly or noticed by the wrong kind of presence. My mind could not help but connect the events, my son seeing the man reacting so strongly during our rosary, my father sprinkling holy water, and then the fever that followed the very next day. Whether it was coincidence, normal illness, or something else, I could not say for sure, but the timing made it hard to ignore the old beliefs. Because of everything that had happened, I became more cautious and more watchful. A day after that fever episode, afraid that it might happen again, I decided that my little boy and I would stay with my grandmother in the living room for the afternoon before my parents came home from work. I thought that staying together in one area, especially in a more open part of the house, would make us feel safer. The living room was familiar and bright, connected to the rest of the home and close to the front door. We sat up there, my son playing with his toys on the floor while my grandmother watched over him, occasionally talking to him or to herself as she sat and moved around slowly. At some point during that afternoon, I went to the dining area to get a glass of water from the fridge. The dining area was just beside the living room, separated by a small open space, the same area where my son had pointed during the rosary. I walked toward the fridge, thinking of nothing more than quenching my thirst. As I opened the fridge or moved close to it, something caught my attention from the corner of my eye. It happened so quickly that my initial reaction was to jump in shock, my body reacting before my mind fully processed what I had seen. My heart started beating faster, and I turned my head to look directly at the spot where the movement had been. What I saw made my breath catch. There, in the space between the living room and dining area, was the figure of a man. He was wearing brown clothes, the kind that looked like simple, old-fashioned everyday garments. On his head, he wore a large brown hat, wide and familiar, similar to the style worn by members of the Katipunan in old historical photos. The hat made him look like he had stepped out of a different time, belonging more to the days of revolution and colonization than to our modern house. He was not blurry or formless. He had a clear shape. He was standing there, not far from my child and my grandmother, and he was looking at my kid as he played. I could not clearly see his facial expression. There was something indistinct about his face, like the details were there but not sharp enough for me to memorize. Yet, despite that, I had a strong feeling that he was smiling or at least watching with a kind of fondness. I did not feel the cold, suffocating fear that sometimes comes with dark presences. Instead, I felt something strange but softer, as if whatever or whoever he was fond of my child, simply standing there and quietly observing, not intending harm. Still, seeing someone who clearly did not belong in our time, in our house, unsettled me deeply. As soon as I could find my voice, I went back to my grandmother and told her what I had seen. I described the man in brown clothes and a large brown hat like that of a Katapunan member. I told her that he had been standing there, looking at my son. This time, she did not shrug it off completely or accuse me of imagining things, but she still tried to soften the weight of it. She responded that maybe it was just a passerby. Her words sounded strange, because a passerby does not usually walk through the inside of a house or appear and disappear silently. Yet that was her way of explaining it to herself, of making it feel less threatening. A passerby can be ignored, accepted as something that is just moving along, not staying, not claiming the space as its own. What struck me is that I seemed to be sensitive to these things only when I was in that house. It was as if the walls and the land around it opened some part of my vision or intuition that remained quiet everywhere else. Years later, when I moved and began living with my husband, building a life with him and our growing family, I noticed something. I had not experienced the same kind of sightings or sensations in our new home. We now have 2 kids, and our daily life is busy with work, chores, school, and all the little challenges of raising children. And yet, in all this time, I have not seen anything unusual in our current house. My eldest son, who once stared at a bathroom door and clung to me during the rosary, does not seem to experience those things anymore either. Whatever it was that walked through my parents' home, it did not follow us here. But the connection between my children and unseen entities did not end entirely. An additional experience came just recently, last February, when I was caught up with chickenpox. It was a difficult time. My body was covered in itchy, painful spots, and I had to be careful not to spread it to my children. Because I needed to be isolated while I recovered, I could not look after them the way I usually did. For their safety and mine, we decided that it would be best if my mom took care of them for a while, so she brought them to my hometown. They stayed there for nearly 2 weeks, living in the house where I grew up, surrounded by the familiar faces and places of my past. During that time, I missed them terribly, but I knew it was necessary. When my recovery finally reached the point where I was no longer contagious and felt strong enough to resume my usual responsibilities, my husband and I went to fetch the kids from my parents and bring them home. I was excited and relieved to have our family together again under one roof. At first, everything seemed fine. But soon after we got back, my younger son, who was 1 year and 5 months old at the time, began to act strangely at night. He would wake up around 3 o'clock in the morning, jerking and crying as if someone had startled him, or as if he had been pulled out of a bad dream. His small body would tense up, and his cries had a tone that felt different from ordinary night waking. When morning came, he was not in his normal mood. He was restless, irritable, and not his usual cheerful self. This went on for 2 nights in a row. My husband and I were exhausted and worried. We tried the usual things, rocking him, feeding him, checking if he had a fever or if something physically hurt, but nothing seemed to fully explain his behavior. The time he woke up, around 3 in the morning, also unsettled us. That hour has a certain reputation in many cultures, often called the witching hour, or a time when spirits are more active. I tried not to be superstitious, but the pattern was hard to ignore. Finally, we decided to take him to an albulario, a faith healer, hoping that if something unseen was bothering him, it could be addressed that way. We went to see a woman known for treating children who seemed affected by spirits, or strange energies. When she began to examine my son and feel his pulse, she asked a question that surprised me. She asked if he woke up at 3 in the morning. I was taken aback by how accurately she guessed, or knew, that detail. I said yes and asked her how she knew. She looked at me calmly and said that an entity was playing with my son, disturbing his sleep and making him restless. She then asked if we had a big mango tree in our backyard. Her question made me think of the one we did have near our home, but my first instinct was to say that it was probably not related, because my son had grown up in our current home and had always been fine there. He only started behaving like this after we brought him back from my parents' house. I told her that, thinking it meant the source must be somewhere else. As I tried to answer her question more clearly, a thought came to me. I suddenly remembered that beside my parents' house stands a big mango tree that can be seen clearly from the window of the room where my sons had stayed during their 2-week visit. That tree has been there for many years, tall and strong, its branches spreading wide. My mind returned to old stories people used to tell about spirits living in big trees, especially mango trees, and my chest tightened. The healer continued with her prayers and rituals, doing whatever she believed would help send the entity away and stop it from playing with my son. After the session, we went home, carrying with us the quiet hope that things would change. And they did. After that visit to the faith healer, my younger son went back to normal. He stopped waking up at 3 in the morning jerking and crying. He slept more peacefully, and his mood in the daytime returned to what it had been before. He was once again the same child we knew, playful, energetic, and calm. Looking back at everything, from the time my eldest son pointed at an invisible man by the bathroom door, to the figure in the Caterpillar-like clothes watching him play, to the nights of my younger son waking up at 3 in the morning after staying at a house near a big mango tree, I still resist saying that I fully believe in ghosts. A part of me clings to the idea that there might be some other explanation. But another part of me, the part that has felt the weight of a small child clinging to me in fear and seen a man in brown clothes where no ordinary person could have stood, cannot deny that there are things in this world that do not fit neatly into what we consider normal. Whether they are souls lingering, entities playing with children they find charming, or just passing spirits that move through old houses and stand under mango trees, I may never fully understand. All I know is that they have brushed close to my family more than once, and each time, we have had to meet them with prayer, faith, and a quiet acceptance that the world is bigger and stranger than it looks. Back when we were younger and still surrounded by the familiar roads, buildings, and stories of the university town, there was one place and one presence that never quite left our minds, no matter how many years passed or how far we moved away, and that presence was what people called the Black Lady of CLSU. The story did not start with me, though I eventually had my own encounter. It started inside my friend M's house, in a simple bedroom shared by 2 sisters, a room that should have been a safe and ordinary place to sleep. It was late at night, the kind of hour where the whole house feels hushed, and even the insects outside seem to hum in a low, lulling rhythm. M and her sister had already gone to bed, curling up under the protection of a mosquito net that hung like a thin white veil over their mattress. The net gently moved when they shifted or when air passed through the room, and the dimness in that corner of the house made the space feel like its own small world. Outside, the window was closed or partly open to the night, and the vague shapes of trees and roofs formed dark outlines against the sky. M and her sister lay close to each other, the way siblings often do when they share the same bed and same tiredness after a long day. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The kind of silence that settles over a house late at night wrapped itself around them, broken only by the soft sounds of breathing, the occasional distant bark of a dog, or a vehicle passing far away on the main road. Then, without warning, something changed in the air. M's sister would later describe it as one of those moments where everything feels normal 1 second, and in the next, tension floods the room with no clear explanation. M suddenly sat up, her body jolting forward as if pulled by an invisible thread, and her hand shot out to grab her sister's forearm with such force that it hurt. Her fingers dug into the skin, desperate and shaking, and her sister woke up with a start, shocked by both the pain and the urgency in M's grip. Inside the mosquito net, the 2 of them were now fully awake, the fabric around them swaying slightly as they moved. M's eyes were wide, fixed on one edge of the mosquito net near the window, as if something terrifying had appeared there, and could still be seen hanging or standing or floating in that spot. Her breathing was uneven, and her whole body trembled, but she kept pointing at that particular corner, her voice cracking as she whispered and then repeated in a louder, panicked tone. "There's a ghost!" She said it again and again, insisting to her sister that she was not imagining things. Her sister, still groggy and trying to blink the sleep from her eyes, followed the direction of M's pointing finger, staring at that same edge of the net near the window. But no matter how hard she tried to see what M was seeing, she could not make out anything unusual. To her, it was just the mosquito net, the faint light from the window, and the usual shadows that came with the night. She told them that there was nothing there, but M would not be calmed that easily. M kept describing what she saw, her voice unsteady but her words clear. She said the ghost was a woman, dressed in black, wearing a veil that covered part of her face. Through that veil, M could see an expression so angry, so filled with rage, that it chilled her to the bone. The figure looked like a witch, she said, not the cartoon kind, but the kind that seemed to radiate hatred and sorrow at the same time. The dress was long and black, flowing downwards in a way that didn't quite match the way cloth normally hangs from a body. It lingered at that corner of the net, hovering near the window, as if it were leaning into the room from somewhere just beyond the visible world. It stayed there for several seconds, long enough for M to take in the details and feel her fear rise to its peak, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished. One moment it was there, looming at the edge of their sleep, and the next, there was nothing but the mosquito net and the regular darkness of the room. M remained shaken, her sister left to decide whether to believe her or not. Stories like that tend to spread, especially in small communities built around a university where students walk late at night, travel the same paths, and share rumors as easily as they share snacks or notes. Over time, some students who passed by M's house at night began to say that they too had seen something strange in that area. They spoke of a black figure, a woman in dark clothing, seen standing in front of the terrace of that house. Sometimes she was motionless, just a shadow among the shadows. Sometimes she was clearer, a slim dark shape that seemed to watch passers-by with a quiet intensity. It was never long enough for anyone to walk up confidently and try to see if it was just a trick of the light. It was always a brief, unnerving glimpse, something noticed from the side of the eye that made people quicken their steps and look over their shoulders. M and her sister also told me about something else they had discovered in their backyard: bottled fetuses. There were jars with small forms inside, preserved and buried or hidden as if someone had wanted to keep them out of sight but not completely out of reach. I was not sure what exactly had happened in that house in the past, whether it had been a place where some form of illegal or secret practice had taken place, whether someone had once done cruel or desperate things there, or whether there was another explanation entirely. But the presence of those bottled fetuses in the yard added a sinister layer to the atmosphere. It made it easier to believe that something might have been left behind, some echo of pain or grief or wrongdoing that refused to leave. I did not know if that was the reason why the house seemed haunted, but it was hard not to connect the dots when you heard about angry veiled women and hidden remains of babies all tied to the same property. As if that were not enough, there were other strange things happening inside the house. In one of the rooms, people sometimes heard an unseen bell ringer. It was as if an invisible hand rang a bell at odd times, the sound clear and distinct even though there was no visible source. The ringing would echo lightly through the air, making people look up from whatever they were doing, only to realize that the bell had stopped and nothing in the room had moved. There were stories of that sound coming from an otherwise empty room, a delicate ringing that made you wonder who, or what, was trying to call attention to itself. In another story, there was a white lady once seen in their living room, a pale counterpart to the black lady, adding even more confusion to the list of presences in that house. To avoid creating too much chaos in the telling, I usually focus on the black lady, because she is the one shape that appears again and again in tales both old and new, but the fact that there were multiple spirits mentioned only reinforced the idea that the house and its surroundings were not quiet in the spiritual sense. Outside the boundaries of M's home, the legend of the Black Lady stretched across the university community. People began to say that this black lady was responsible for the yearly deaths that seemed to occur in or near the university. Each year, it was either a resident of CLSU or a student who would meet an unfortunate end, often in ways that were sudden or tragic. Some people connected these events to the black-clad ghost that had become an urban legend among students and staff. There was the story of an old woman who had died in an accident on the highway that bordered or cut through the area. She had been hit or otherwise involved in a collision, the details of the accident lost in the retelling, but the conclusion always the same: she did not survive. Some witnesses later said that shortly before the old woman met her fate, they had seen a black lady near the highway. She was standing there quietly, or crossing the road, or appearing at the edge of their vision just moments before the accident took place. It is hard to tell exactly how much of it is memory, and how much of it is the human desire to attach a pattern to random tragedy, but the association stuck. Year after year, whenever someone died, people would whisper, "Maybe the black lady had something to do with it," even if they had no direct proof and no clear motive to pin on a ghost. For a long time, the black lady was just that to me, a story told around gatherings, a rumor passed from one group of kids to another, something that existed more in words and fears than in anything I personally knew. But then, in the 90s, when my family was still residing in the university community, I had an experience that changed the way I thought about her and about ghosts in general. One day, we attended a picnic at a place called Nature Park. It was a special area within or near the university where some of the employees and their families lived. The park was rich with fish ponds and trees, creating an environment that felt peaceful and green, with the light shimmering on water and leaves rustling softly in the breeze. It was the kind of place where children could run around and adults could sit and talk, and where the sounds of nature blended with the distant echoes of university life. We had gathered there as families often do, bringing food, drinks, mats, and stories. People laughed, ate, and relaxed. But for me, at some point, the conversation grew dull. Either the adults were talking about things that did not interest me, or the kids my age had drifted off to form their own group, and I was left feeling a bit apart from everyone. Boredom wrapped itself around me, and I felt the urge to move, to explore, to see something other than the same faces at the picnic. So I decided to take a walk by myself. I wandered away from the main group, my footsteps carrying me along a path that passed by a fish pond. The water in the pond was calm, maybe reflecting the late afternoon sky, maybe holding the faint shadows of nearby trees in its surface. The air smelled of damp earth, plants, and the faint hint of fish, all mixed together in the way that only places with ponds and greenery can manage. Ahead of me, there was a group of trees, standing together like a small cluster of guardians at the edge of the open space. They were not extremely far away from where I walked, maybe about 15 feet. The space between me and the trees was clear, with nothing blocking my view. In that open span, I could see every trunk, every branch low enough to notice, every patch of ground beneath them. It was still late in the afternoon, so there was plenty of light. The sun had not yet fully set, though it might have started its descent, casting longer shadows but not yet plunging everything into darkness. In my mind, ghosts and spirits belong to the deep night, to the hours when the world is quiet and hidden. They did not belong to sunny, open moments like this one, and that belief gave me a certain sense of security. As I walked, my eyes naturally settled on the trees, and it was then that something very strange happened. I saw a figure, a tall and thin black shape, suddenly appear behind one of the trees. It did not step out from behind the trunk in a normal way. Instead, it seemed to be floating, not touching the ground at all. The black figure glided from behind one tree toward another, crossing the space in a smooth, unnatural motion. It was dark, like a shadow that had detached itself from any specific body and decided to move independently. It was taller and leaner than a normal person, and the way it moved made my skin prickle with unease. It did not sway like a person walking, did not show the usual small up and down motion that comes naturally when feet hit the ground. It simply drifted, its shape constant, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished when it reached the next tree. There was no gradual fading, no clear turning away. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, swallowed by the tree or the space behind it. Being 12 years old at the time, I was caught in that sharp tension between curiosity and fear. A part of me was deeply unsettled. The way the figure moved, floating and gliding instead of walking, did not match anything I had seen from living humans. The timing, the lighting, the emptiness of the space around me, all of it made me doubt that this was just a trick of the eyes. Another part of me, however, was stubborn and skeptical. I had always thought that ghosts appeared at night, when the world was dark and quiet, and our minds were more open to imagining things. This was only late afternoon. There was still light in the sky. People were still at the picnic. Life was going on only a short walk away from where I stood. Could a ghost really show itself in such an ordinary slice of time? I stood there, thinking about what I had seen. The figure's appearance and disappearance replayed in my mind like a short, strange video clip that I could not stop watching. I was tempted to walk closer to the trees, to investigate, and see if maybe there was someone playing a prank, maybe a tall person in dark clothes who had ducked behind the trunk at just the right angle to make it look like they vanished. I imagined myself going up to the trees, walking around them, checking behind every trunk, peering into the spaces between branches. I wanted to prove that it was something normal, that I had simply misinterpreted what I saw. At the same time, I imagined getting closer and feeling that same prickling fear intensify, maybe finding nothing there at all, or worse, seeing the black figure again, this time closer, clearer, and directed at me. I pondered for a few moments, my mind wrestling with the desire to be brave and the instinct to stay safe. In the end, caution won. I decided not to go to the trees. Instead, I turned around and walked back towards my family and the other people at the picnic. As I returned to the sound of voices and laughter, I felt the weight of what I had seen settle into silence inside me. I did not tell many people about it immediately. Maybe I did not want to be laughed at, or maybe I did not want to hear someone give a simple explanation that did not match how strange and clear it had felt in the moment. But that image of the floating, thin, black shape stayed with me, and as I grew older and heard more stories about the Black Lady, I began to wonder if that was her, if that was the same Black Lady who had hovered by M's mosquito net, been seen in front of terraces, and been blamed for deaths and accidents. Today, all these years later, the Black Lady might still be around, wandering the spaces of the university, slipping between trees, houses, and roads, seen only for a few seconds at a time by people who do not really expect to see anything unusual. She has become something like an urban legend, a shared story that belongs to the place itself. New generations of students and residents might have their own encounters, their own quick glances of a veiled woman in black, their own unexplained moments when something glides through their field of vision and then disappears before they can fully react. Whether it will ever be proved that she truly causes deaths, or whether she is just a ghostly witness to tragedies that would have happened anyway, is something no one can say with certainty. The living will keep telling stories, the dead will keep their secrets, and somewhere in between, the figure of the Black Lady will continue to move at the edge of belief, a dark silhouette crossing from one tree to another just when someone happens to be looking. I have always been fascinated by the supernatural, almost in a way that feels like a quiet itch in the back of my mind that never fully goes away. Even when I am busy with normal things like work, errands, or scrolling on my phone, there is always this part of me that wonders what else is out there, just beyond what our eyes can see. Sometimes that curiosity feels exciting, like standing at the edge of a mystery. Other times it feels heavy, like I'm peeking through a door I am not sure I want to open all the way. To be completely honest, there are moments when I find myself seriously considering the idea of making my sixth sense more sensitive, as if I could turn a dial inside myself and suddenly see much more than I do now. In my country, people often call it having a third eye, the ability to see things beyond what our normal eyes can perceive. It's not just a figure of speech here. It is a belief that runs deep in our culture, buried under jokes, whispers, warnings, and stories shared late at night. I know people who say they have it, and I can see in their faces that they truly believe in what they experience. That is part of what fuels my curiosity, the fact that these are not strangers on TV, but my own friends. I have one friend who got her third eye in a way that sounds so simple it feels almost unreal. She did not do any complex ritual or travel to some faraway mountain. A gifted child, someone already known for seeing things from beyond, simply placed a hand on her forehead, prayed over her, and asked that she be able to see what they see. According to my friend, that was all it took. After that, her world changed. She started noticing figures where others saw empty hallways, shadows where others saw only darkness, and movements where others felt nothing. When she tells her stories, there is something in her voice that makes it hard to dismiss as imagination. She does not sound proud or dramatic. She sounds tired sometimes, like someone carrying a weight she did not fully understand when she asked for it. Every time I talk to her, I think of that moment, a kid's hand, a short prayer, and a lifetime of seeing beyond. In a way, I think my own curiosity is a mix of wanting to end the wondering and wanting to enter that world. I tell myself that if I could just experience what these gifted people experience, if I could see what they see and hear what they hear, maybe I would stop questioning and finally know. I imagine myself standing in a haunted place, not as a scared outsider hoping to avoid seeing anything, but as someone whose eyes are fully open, able to communicate with whatever is there. Part of me wonders if that would bring clarity, or just more confusion. Another friend of mine once told me about a different dimension, a world that exists alongside ours but remains hidden most of the time. In that dimension, she said, there are beings with one eye in the middle of their foreheads. Not the monsters from cartoons or horror movies, but whole families of one-eyed beings who live in a place that resembles our own, with homes, children, routines, and daily lives that feel ordinary to them, even if they look strange to us. I listened to that story with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. I tried to imagine a world layered over ours, where these single-eyed beings walk down streets that overlap with our roads, sit under trees that grow from the same ground, and watch us with their lone gaze while we remain oblivious. Hearing things like that makes me ask myself if I am really serious about wanting more sensitivity to the supernatural. I imagine what it would mean if I truly opened myself up to the other side. It is not like buying a new phone that you can turn off when you get tired of notifications. If I were to fully embrace having a third eye, I know there would be responsibilities attached. Beings unseen might expect things from me. I might find myself standing between two worlds, carrying messages, or dealing with energies that do not care if I am tired or scared. I do not want to be pushed into that by anyone else's excitement or influence. That's why I keep telling myself that whatever I decide, it must be my decision alone. I don't want to be a person who says, "Oh, my friend told me it would be cool, so I went ahead and did it." If I ever choose to open that door, I want to do it knowing that I am ready to live with whatever comes through. Sometimes, my curiosity even goes beyond just seeing spirits or energies. There is a part of me that wonders what it would be like to learn about witchcraft while I am still alive, a topic that is very taboo in my country. Even the word, witch, makes people uncomfortable. It calls up memories of old stories, whispered accusations, and things that good people are taught not to talk about. But the more something is forbidden, the more alluring it becomes. I imagine what it would feel like to meet an actual witch, not a Halloween costume or a character in a movie, but a real person who works with old knowledge, rituals, herbs, and energies. What would they look like? Would they be someone you could pass on the street without ever suspecting? What would they be willing to teach, if anything? The idea of sitting in a quiet room while someone explains how certain things work, the kind of things people are afraid to name aloud, is both scary and incredibly interesting. What really pushes my fascination is the simple fact that there are things in this world that no one, not even science, has been able to fully explain. There are events that ignore the rules we are taught in school. There are stories that repeat across cultures, across generations, told by people who have never met each other, describing almost the exact same kind of beings or experiences. When I think about that, my logical side falls silent. If only I were brave enough, I think, I would go back to that haunted apartment, the one that still lingers in my memory. I imagine myself walking through its rooms, its corridors, its dim corners, this time not as a frightened guest but as someone ready to communicate properly with the entities that live there. I can still remember the feeling of that place, how the air seemed thicker or heavier in some parts, how certain corners felt like they were watching you instead of the other way around. If my sixth sense ever becomes sharper, I suspect that apartment would be a place where it would come alive. Even without fully opening my third eye, I feel like my sixth sense is already somewhat sensitive. I notice places that feel strange, people who carry out energy, and random moments where something invisible seems to press slightly on my awareness. While I am still here, living and breathing in this world, I have made a quiet promise to myself. Even if these experiences are frightening, I will take note of every paranormal thing that happens to me. I will remember the details, the timing, the feelings, because I suspect that the drive to know more will always be inside me, nudging me to keep looking, to keep listening. Maybe one day, when I am older, I will look back at all these experiences and finally see a pattern that makes sense. Or maybe I won't. Maybe the mystery itself is the point. I am not the only one in my circle who has had interactions with things that seem beyond human. One of my friends has had encounters with what she calls nature spirits, or shadow people. When she talks about them, there is no dramatic flair. She just calmly describes what she saw or felt. And that calmness somehow makes it even more unnerving. I've told myself that I'll share my own experiences, and I will, but I think hers deserve to be told first, because in some ways, what she went through feels more frightening than what happened to me. She has a habit of going out for a smoke, especially at night when things are quieter and the heat of the day has faded. I often accompany her on those small trips, partly to keep her company, partly because the walk to the nearby small store gives me a chance to breathe and clear my head. The store is close to my apartment, a familiar little place with a simple setup, a counter, some shelves, a few cement benches outside where people can sit and talk or just watch the road. On most nights, it feels completely ordinary, the kind of spot you never link to anything supernatural. But one night, things were different. We had gone out late, maybe later than we usually do. The air felt heavier, and the neighborhood seemed quieter than usual, as if even the insects had decided to rest. As we walked, my friend suddenly became unusually quiet. Her eyes were focused on something ahead, and I could tell from her expression that she was seeing more than an empty street and parked vehicles. She told me later that beside a parked car in front of the gate of my apartment, she had seen a shadow standing there. Not a shadow cast by the car or a tree, but a shape that looked like it belonged to a person, just standing still. She did not describe it in great detail, but the way she said it, a shadow standing there, painted enough of a picture in my mind. We lingered outside for a bit, as we usually did, and I guess we stayed out long enough that the night settled deeper around us, turning familiar corners into darker shapes and the air into something that felt almost watchful. When we finally decided to return to my apartment, our path took us past a body of water beside a small resort. During the day, that pond looks almost pretty. Its surface is covered with hyacinths and lilies, their leaves and flowers floating together to create a green and sometimes colorful blanket over the water. You might see dragonflies hovering, birds dipping down, and the reflection of sunlight glinting off small ripples. But at night, it looks different. The same plants that look peaceful in the daylight become part of a dark, shifting mass. The water becomes a black mirror that reflects only the faintest hints of light from nearby houses or street lamps. As we walked by the pond that night, my friend started mumbling under her breath. At first I could not make out what she was saying, but then I caught the words, red eyes, and "They are coming out of the water." Those words hit me like a cold wind. I let her walk in front of me, partly so I could watch her, and partly because I did not know what to do with what she was saying. I felt both curious and concerned about her behavior. She was not the kind of person who panicked easily, so hearing her mutter about red eyes coming out of a pond made my mind race. I stared at the dark shape of the water, trying to see what she might be seeing. But to me, it was just a still, dark pond, motionless except for the breeze and the occasional unseen creature disturbing the plants. No glowing eyes, no shapes rising from the surface, nothing that my regular human eyes could detect. Still, The hair on the back of my neck stood up, as if my body believed her even if my eyes did not. We walked faster after that, our footsteps quieter, our conversation gone. When we were finally safely inside my apartment, doors closed and lights on, she turned to me and asked if I had felt anything on the way back. I asked her what she meant, confused. She then told me that she had felt small feet walking with us, as if little beings were keeping pace with our steps. I hadn't felt a thing. She claimed that these small red-eyed creatures had risen from the pond and decided to hike along with us, following us towards the apartment. She said they might be nature spirits, beings tied to the land or the water, but she did not know exactly what they were. Hearing that, I felt a mix of ignorance and vulnerability. There we were, walking through what I thought was an empty street, and according to her, we were not alone at all. My own experience in that same general area came on another late night, in a situation that felt similar on the surface but carried its own unsettling details. Once again, we both went out so she could buy cigarettes from the small store. It was late enough that most people had retreated indoors, and the world outside felt stripped down to its bare essentials: dim light, cool air, and the sound of our footsteps. I remember that it was drizzling lightly that night, the kind of fine rain that does not completely soak you but gently settles on your skin and clothes, making the air feel cooler and the ground slightly slick. The store looked almost the same as always, a small, quiet spot with cement benches in front where people could sit. That night, we took advantage of those benches. I sat facing my friend, and about 10 feet away from me were 2 small papaya trees standing side by side. As she smoked, I used the moment to vent about my frustrations. I talked about how I felt my roommate was being dishonest with me, how small things did not add up, how I was starting to feel hurt and betrayed. It is funny how we choose certain settings to release our emotions. 2 people sitting outside a store in the drizzle, with papaya trees and a dark sky as witnesses. While I was in the middle of explaining how I felt, my attention suddenly shifted. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move. It was a shadow, but not the kind that just lies flat on the ground or clings to whatever object is nearby. This shadow seemed to take a step to the right, positioning itself between the 2 small trees. Surprised, I fell silent mid-sentence and stared in that direction. The blackness between the trees seemed thicker now, shaped in a way that suggested a form, not just random darkness. My common sense immediately kicked in and tried to find a normal explanation. I thought that if it were a person standing there or trying to hide, I would be able to see some outline of their body or their head, especially with the drizzle making the air and surfaces a bit reflective. It would be very odd for someone to choose that spot, 10 feet away from us, in the rain, between small papaya trees, as a hiding place. Besides, if it had been a person taking a step, I should have been able to see that movement clearly. Instead, what I saw was different. As the shadow moved, it seemed to lose its form, almost like smoke dispersing or ink dissolving in water. It did not step so much as shift and then dissipate. I turned my back after that, looking away from the trees and trying to calm myself. I was distraught, not only because of the conversation about my roommate but now also because of that unsettling sight. With my back to the spot where I had seen the shadow, I told my friend what I had just witnessed. My voice probably shook a little as I described the shadow that had stepped, or slid, between the trees and then faded. When I finished telling her, expecting maybe some comfort or a rational explanation, what she told me only frightened me more. She said that as we walked towards the store earlier, before we even sat down, she had already seen that tall shadow just standing between those same trees. She had not mentioned it because, to her, it might have just been another one of those things she sees, another presence blending into the scenery. Knowing that she had seen it standing there from the beginning, and that I had only noticed it when it decided to move, made everything feel more real and more eerie. It meant that whatever I had seen was not just my imagination influenced by our creepy conversations or my own worries. It was something that existed in that space, a tall shadow that chose to reveal itself to me in that brief, unsettling way. In moments like that, my fascination with the supernatural feels less like curiosity, and more like standing on a narrow bridge between fear and wonder. I still do not know exactly what that shadow was, or what the small red-eyed beings from the pond might be, or what would happen if I truly opened myself up to seeing everything that moves beyond normal sight. But even as I hesitate, even as I feel afraid, the part of me that wants to understand keeps paying attention, keeps collecting these moments, and keeps walking outside at night, half hoping and half dreading that I will see something again. It was around midnight, that deep part of the night when the whole house feels quiet and the darkness seems heavier, when I suddenly became aware of heavy footsteps in the hallway. They sounded exactly like my father's footsteps, slow and solid, with that familiar weight that I had heard countless times growing up. Our house was simple in its layout, and my parents' room was just across from the room I shared with my sister. It only took a few steps to cross from their room to ours, and over the years I had memorized the rhythm of those footsteps without even meaning to. That night, as I lay there in my bed, half awake but with my eyes closed, I heard those footsteps clearly, starting from the direction of my parents' room and moving steadily toward ours. Each step was so distinct that I could almost picture where they were on the floor, creeping closer and closer to the entrance of our room. There was no door to swing open or shut. Instead, there was just a simple curtain hanging in the doorway, a thin piece of cloth that marked the border between the hallway and our sleeping space. When the footsteps finally reached the entrance, right at that curtain just a few inches from where my bed was placed, they stopped. My bed was positioned so close to the doorway that if someone stood at the entrance, they would be right next to my head. That was what I assumed was happening. I believed my father had gotten up to check on us and was now standing there watching us sleep. It would not have been the first time. Parents often do that without their children knowing, quietly standing in the doorway to make sure everything is okay, counting the breaths of their kids, reassuring themselves that the night is calm. So at first, I was not afraid. I did the most natural thing I could think of in that moment. I pretended to be asleep. I closed my eyes more firmly, kept my breathing steady, and lay as still as possible, thinking that if my father believed we were all sleeping peacefully, he would soon go back to his room. A few minutes passed, or at least it felt like a few minutes, and during that time I did not hear any further movement. There were no retreating footsteps, no shifting of cloth, no creaking floorboards. Whoever or whatever had reached the entrance of our room had simply stopped there, and remained completely still. At first I assumed that my father was just standing there quietly, perhaps lost in his thoughts or too tired to move right away. But as the seconds stretched into minutes, a new thought slowly crept into my mind. How long was he going to stand there just watching us? The more I thought about it, the stranger it felt. My father was not the type to linger for so long in silence like that. If he only wanted to check if we were sleeping okay, it would normally take him just a glance before returning to his bed. The feeling of being watched began to weigh on me. A thick uneasiness started to settle in the pit of my stomach. My heart rate, which had been calm a short while before, now began to speed up, and my skin prickled with that unpleasant tension that comes when your instincts start whispering that something is wrong. Slowly, the idea that this might not be my father at all began to form in my mind. I replayed the footsteps in my memory. Yes, they sounded like his, but I also knew that sometimes spirits like to mimic familiar sounds and movements. It was only when that thought fully surfaced that I felt a cold realization wash over me. It was not my father standing at the entrance to our room. It was someone, or something, else. One thing that worked in my favor that night was a long-time habit of mine. I was used to sleeping with a blanket completely covering my head and my body, like a cocoon. It might sound uncomfortable to some people, but for me it became a kind of shield, a layer between me and the darkness of the room. So when I realized that this presence at the curtain was not my father, I was already fully wrapped up under my blanket. I did not have to move or adjust anything to hide myself. I was already hidden. The only thing I could do was keep still and keep my eyes open inside that small, warm space. Even without seeing anything, I knew someone was standing next to my bed. I could feel it. There is a particular sensation that comes when another person, or another being, is close by, even if you cannot see them. The air feels different, thicker and more charged. It was like I had an invisible antenna inside me that could pick up that energy. I have always considered myself very sensitive when it comes to spirits. I may not always see them directly, but I can sense them easily. In that moment, there was no doubt in my mind. Someone was standing right there beside me, only the thin curtain and the blanket separating us. I lay there, tense and completely still, listening as carefully as I could for any strange sounds. The room was quiet except for the steady noise of the electric fan. The fan was oscillating, turning slowly from one side of the room to the other, blowing cool air over us and then sweeping it away, over and over again. I focused on that sound, trying to anchor myself to something normal. Then, suddenly, my fragile sense of calm shattered. Out of nowhere, right into my right ear, I heard a loud "Ha!" It was the sound of someone heaving an exaggerated deep breath, as if they were intentionally exhaling with force just to make sure I heard it. The voice behind that breath was clearly male. It did not sound like my father's voice at all. My father's breath has its own familiar tone, one that would never startle me. This breath, however, was different. It was rough, heavy, and intrusive. The timing of it made it even more disturbing. Every time the head of the electric fan rotated and faced in my direction, that same "ha" would sound right into my ear, perfectly synchronized with the wind from the fan. The fan would swing toward me, the air would hit the blankets covering me, and at that exact moment, I would hear that awful breath. I was extremely scared. My body began to shake, even though I was trying with all my strength to keep it still so I would not draw any more attention to myself. I could feel beads of sweat forming all over my skin, despite the cool air from the fan. The blanket that had felt comforting a moment ago now felt like both a shield and a trap. I knew that if I wanted to, I could move. It was not like those stories where people say they experienced sleep paralysis and could not move their limbs. My muscles still obeyed me. But even though I could move, I chose not to. Fear pinned me down more effectively than any physical force could. I decided that staying completely still and silent was safer. If I did not move, perhaps whatever it was standing next to me would eventually lose interest and go away. Minutes dragged by in a slow, torturous line. The pattern continued. The fan would turn toward me. The cool breeze would wash over the blanket. Simultaneously, the entity would breathe loudly into my ear. "Ha!" Then the fan would turn away, and there would be a brief pause, only for the fan to swing back again and bring that dreadful sound with it. After a while, I noticed that the character of the breathing was changing. It seemed to grow tired. The once loud, deliberate "ha!" began to soften, sounding more like the labored breaths of someone utterly exhausted. For a short stretch, the breathing would become weak and faint, like someone who had run too far and was trying to catch their breath. But just when I thought it might fade away completely, it would suddenly return to its original intensity, sounding loud and exaggerated once more. This cycle of loud, forceful breathing followed by weary, weakened breaths continued for what felt like an eternity. In reality, it lasted for about an hour. Imagine lying in bed, completely covered, knowing something is standing beside you, and having to listen to that creepy, unnatural breathing in your ear over and over again, timed perfectly to the movement of the fan, for nearly 60 minutes. Every second felt stretched out, magnified by fear. My mind raced in circles, unable to fully form any plan other than, "Don't move." My heart thudded so loudly in my chest that I began to wonder if the entity could hear it too. Finally, after what seemed like an endless night inside that small space under the blanket, the "ha" stopped. The fan kept turning, the air continued to blow, but there was no more breath along with it. At first, I did not dare to feel relieved. The absence of the sound did not automatically mean the presence had left. My intuition was still keenly aware of something beside me. I could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes, the pressure of something occupying my personal space. The silence felt almost as loud as the breathing had been. It made my skin crawl in a different way, because now I felt that whatever had been toying with me might be watching and waiting, and I had no way to know what it would do next. I stayed under the blanket for a few minutes longer, trying to gather up enough courage to do something other than lie there in terror. Questions spun through my mind. Was it still there? Had it moved closer? Had it moved away? If I pulled the blanket off, would I see something staring straight into my face, or would there be nothing at all? My entire body felt tense, like a bowstring pulled too tight. Finally, I decided that I could not endure the uncertainty any longer. With all the courage I could muster, I took a deep, shaky breath and then quickly pulled the blanket off my head. The first thing I did was turn my head to the right side of my bed, where I had felt that presence and heard that awful breathing. I looked directly at the space beside me. There was nothing there. No shadowy figure, no strange shape, nothing that looked out of place. Just empty air and the same surroundings I had seen countless times before. On my left side was my sister's bed, where she slept peacefully, unaware of the torment I had just gone through. The room looked exactly as it always did, which somehow made the experience feel even more surreal. How could something so intense, so real to my senses, leave no visible trace behind? Even though my eyes told me nothing was there, my heart and nerves did not calm down right away. The rest of the night, I did not sleep comfortably at all. I lay there in a restless state, jumping at every small sound, replaying the breathing in my mind over and over again, and wondering what would have happened if I had moved, spoken, or pulled off the blanket earlier. When morning finally came, the daylight brought some small measure of comfort, though it did not completely erase the fear. As soon as I had the chance, I turned to my sister and asked her if she had heard anything during the night, specifically the loud breathing that had haunted me. She blinked at me, still sleepy and confused, and said no. She had not heard anything at all. That answer did not surprise me as much as it might have, because I already knew that whatever had happened had been directed at me. Still, hearing her say she had slept through everything emphasized how alone I had been in that experience. From that day onward, that room changed in my mind. It was no longer just the room where my sister and I slept. It became a place marked by that encounter. Eventually, the room stopped being used as a bedroom. It is now a stock room, a space filled with stored items instead of sleeping people. But even though its function changed, the feeling it carries did not fully disappear. Up until now, whenever I go near that room, I can still feel a presence there. It is not always as strong as that night, but it lingers like a shadow clinging to the corners. The air feels different when I get too close, heavier and more watchful. Because of that, I avoid going in there unless I absolutely have a reason to. If I can help it, I do not step inside at all. That one night, with the heavy footsteps, the silent figure, and the hour-long breathing in my ear, was more than enough to convince me that some spaces hold on to the things that once moved through them, whether we can see them or not. This story happened in our house again, in the same place where so many strange things have already taken place that sometimes it feels like the house itself is breathing and watching us, like it has its own memory of everything that has happened inside its walls. We have lived here long enough to get used to some of the weirdness, but that does not mean we fully understand it, or that it no longer scares us. There have been many events that we still cannot explain, things that make us look at each other and ask, "Did you see that too?" Or, "Are you sure you didn't touch that?" Simple nights have turned into nights of confusion, and normal days have been broken by moments that feel like scenes from a horror movie. There are times when we hear something fall in another room, a loud thud that sounds like a book or some heavy object crashing onto the floor. But when we check, nothing is out of place, and no one else in the house has moved anything. There were nights when the television suddenly changed channels by itself, flipping away from what we were watching right in front of our eyes, as if someone invisible had picked up the remote and pressed the buttons, even though the remote was sitting untouched on the table. In some moments, the TV would turn off by itself without warning, the screen going black while we were still talking or watching, and all of us would look around, checking if someone had bumped into something or if there had been a power problem, only to realize that everything else in the house was working just fine. Then there are the objects, the small things that should stay where we leave them but somehow do not. Sometimes our belongings go missing: keys, hair ties, combs, small tools, chargers, and other things we use almost every day. We are sure we put them in one place, like a drawer or a shelf or the top of a table, but when we go back for them, they are not there. At first we suspect each other, asking if someone borrowed this or moved that, and usually everyone denies touching anything. We search all the obvious places and then move on to the less obvious ones, poking through cabinets, checking under beds and behind furniture, and sometimes getting annoyed at ourselves for being forgetful. We keep searching, and in the end, the missing object turns up in some strange part of the house where it makes absolutely no sense for it to be, like a remote control in a closet no one uses, or keys inside a bag that has been hanging in the same corner for days untouched, or a comb placed on top of a cabinet so high no one in the family would think to put it there. It is as if the house has a habit of swallowing things and then spitting them back wherever it feels like. These little incidents, on their own, might be brushed off as simple mistakes or accidents, but after a while, they began to feel like a pattern. Still, there is one paranormal event that stands out from all the others, one thing that all of us in the family are aware of and that we talk about with a mixture of fear and grim humor whenever someone brings it up. It is something that has happened not just once or twice, but several times, and to different members of the family. That recurring event is the appearance of our family members' doppelgangers. A doppelganger is like a double, a perfect copy of a person, usually seen while the real person is somewhere else. Growing up, I had heard stories about them from movies, books, and older people who liked to scare children with tales of doubles that bring bad luck, but I never imagined we would start seeing them inside our own house, wearing our faces and standing in familiar rooms as if they belonged there. The first person in our family to experience this was my older brother, and his encounter set the tone for everything that came after. One day, my older brother was about to go to the CR, which in our house is a very ordinary part of our daily routine. The CR, or bathroom, is placed in such a way that we pass by it all the time, and there is nothing special about it on the surface. That day, everything outside seemed normal. The air in the house felt the same, there was no strange sound, no flickering lights, nothing. My brother had no reason to expect that anything unusual would happen. He walked towards the CR, probably thinking of nothing in particular, maybe just wanting to wash his face or use the toilet like he always did. As he reached the doorway and looked inside, he froze. Standing inside the CR, facing him, was our mother. She was just there, in the bathroom, staring straight at him. If that had been all, maybe it would not have been so unsettling, but it was the way she looked that shocked him. She was wearing all black, from head to toe. She had on black lipstick, something she would never wear in real life because my mom does not like that kind of fashion at all. She is more into simple clothes and natural colors, and she has never had a taste for goth-style makeup or long, dramatic black dresses, but in that moment, in the CR, that was exactly what my brother saw, our mother in a long black dress, with black lipstick, staring at him in silence. He was so startled that he did not say a word. He just backed away and walked out, probably feeling his heart pounding and his skin prickling with fear. When he stepped outside, trying to shake off what he had just seen, he got an even bigger shock. There, outside the house, was our real mom, busy hanging clothes on the clothesline like she normally does. She was wearing her usual clothes, not black at all, and she looked tired and distracted in the way someone looks when they are concentrating on a chore. My brother's mind had to catch up to what his eyes were telling him. He had just seen Mom, in the CR, dressed in black, staring at him. But the real Mom was here, outside, doing laundry and clearly had not been in the bathroom a moment before. That was the moment he realized that what he saw inside the CR was not our mother at all. It was something else, something that looked exactly like her, but was wrong in small, unsettling ways. It was her doppelganger. When he told us about it later, he tried to act like he was calm, but we could tell he had been shaken by the experience. We tried to imagine what we would have done in his place, staring into the face of someone you love, only to realize later that it was not really them. He described the scene over and over, as if saying it aloud could make it less frightening, but it never did. We listened, half disbelieving, half believing, until finally, because we know our brother, and he is not the type to invent stories for attention, We accepted that something very strange had happened in the CR that day. His experience settled into the background of our family life like a dark shadow, something we tried to forget but never truly could. The next person to see a doppelganger in our house was my big sister, and once it happened to someone else, it became harder and harder to deny that something was really going on. She was also on her way to the CR, again, the same place, the same normal part of the house where so many of our routines begin and end. She walked down the hallway, expecting to go in and use the bathroom like any other day. As she reached the doorway and looked inside, she saw my older brother standing there, brushing his teeth. He was facing the mirror, presumably focused on his reflection and not noticing her at all. It looked so ordinary that she did not feel scared at first. It was just my big brother brushing his teeth. She thought nothing of it and decided not to disturb him. Instead of waiting right outside the door, she chose to go to the living room and wait there until he was done. She turned away from the CR and began to walk towards the living room, only a few steps away, thinking about nothing more than where to sit and how long she might have to wait. But before she even reached the living room, something happened that made her stop in her tracks. She saw my real big brother walking towards her from another direction. He was not coming from the CR at all. He was approaching her as if he had just come out of another part of the house. He looked normal, holding nothing in his hands, not brushing his teeth, and not looking wet or soapy or anything like that. That was the moment something clicked in her mind. If my real big brother was here, walking towards her, then who was the one brushing his teeth in the CR just a moment ago? Her heart started to beat faster, and a cold feeling spread in her chest. She immediately turned around and went back toward the CR to check what she had seen. When she reached the bathroom and looked inside, the person she had seen just seconds before was gone. There was no one standing at the sink, no one brushing their teeth, no sound of water, nothing. The small room was empty. She felt a rush of fear, stronger than before, because by then we were all aware of the first doppelganger that had appeared in the CR, our black version of Mom. My older brother's story had already made the rounds in the family, and we already had that creepy feeling that the CR might have something around it that was not entirely human. To see my brother's double there, doing something so normal, only to find out it was not really him, felt like the house was reminding us that it could show us what it wanted, when it wanted. My sister told us what happened, her voice still nervous, trying to explain the small details, the way my brother had stood, how he held his toothbrush, how normal and real he had looked. It was not some blurry shadow or trick of the light. She was certain she had seen him clearly. And yet, the real person had been somewhere else all along. We all listened with growing unease, because by this point, there was a pattern. First, the fake version of our mother in the CR. Then, the fake version of our older brother in the same place. We started to joke on the surface about our house double, but deep inside we were unsettled. We already knew what a doppelganger meant in old stories, that seeing one could be a sign of bad luck, sickness, or even death. We did not want to believe that, but we could not completely ignore it either. The last one among us to see a doppelganger was me, and by then, I was already nervous about the idea. Part of me thought, what if I'm next? Sometimes when I passed by the CR or walked through the house alone, I would imagine seeing someone I knew standing where they should not be, and it made me walk a little faster or avoid looking directly into dark corners. My turn came during something as simple and ordinary as dinner time. It was in the evening, and I was in the kitchen preparing the plates, getting things ready, the way we always do before we eat together. The house had that familiar sound of clattering plates, low voices, and distant noise from outside. I moved around the kitchen, picking up dishes, setting them down, and thinking about nothing special, just what needed to be done to get dinner on the table. At one point, I was about to get rice. We usually keep the rice pot or rice container in a specific part of the kitchen, and that is where I headed. As I approached that area, I saw my sister standing there with her back to me. She was standing exactly where the rice was, her body blocking my access to the pot. She was not moving, just standing very still in front of the spot where we usually scoop the rice. From the back, She looked completely normal. Her height, her build, her hair, everything matched perfectly. I naturally assumed she was already preparing the rice for everyone, maybe scooping it out and arranging it on the plates. I did not bother to walk all the way up to her or say anything. I simply accepted what I saw. My big sister was already handling the rice, so I did not need to. Feeling a little bit relieved that one task was being taken care of, I turned around and decided to rest for a moment before continuing with the rest of the preparations. Maybe I thought I would grab a drink of water, sit down for a second, or just stand still and take a breath. As soon as I turned, however, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My big sister was just coming out of the CR, walking calmly as if she had only just finished using it. She saw my face and noticed my shocked expression right away. Her eyebrows pulled together in concern, and she immediately asked me what was wrong. I looked at her, then quickly turned my eyes back to the part of the kitchen where I had just seen her standing. There was nobody there. The space in front of the rice container was empty. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, and my hands suddenly felt weak. For a moment, I could not speak. My mind was trying to process the fact that I had just seen my sister standing with her back to me at the rice station, so still and quiet that I assumed she was working, and yet the real her had been in the CR the whole time. Slowly, I told her what I had seen, my voice probably shaky as I explained how I had thought she was already getting the rice, how I had turned to rest only to find her coming from a completely different part of the house. She listened, and I could see that familiar look of fear and recognition in her eyes, the same look we had all had when we told each other about our previous doppelganger encounters. As I glanced back at the kitchen again, the doppelganger was already gone, leaving behind only the normal stillness of the room. In that moment, all the previous stories came flooding back in my mind. My brother's encounter with our mother's double in black inside the CR, my sister's sighting of my brother brushing his teeth in the bathroom when the real brother was elsewhere, and now my own experience seeing my sister's back in the kitchen, only to find she had been in the CR. Each event connected to the next, as if the house was slowly showing each of us that it could wear our faces whenever it wanted, appearing in our usual places and doing ordinary things, but slightly off in a way that only became obvious when the real person appeared somewhere else. Even now, when I think about these things, I feel uneasy. The house looks the same walls, same rooms, same CR, same kitchen. But in my mind, those spaces are layered with memories of doubles that should not exist, standing where our loved ones should be and vanishing the moment we try to look twice. 3 years ago, when life felt a bit more temporary and unsettled than it does now, something happened to me that I still cannot forget no matter how much time has passed or how many ordinary days have come and gone since then. At that time we were living in a small hut, a simple place that was never meant to be permanent, more like a shelter we were using while waiting for better things to come. The hut stood in a quiet area, the kind of place where you could hear the wind passing through, where sounds from outside were clear because there was not much noise to drown them out. There was only a creek a few meters away from us, its presence always there, sometimes gentle and peaceful, sometimes a little eerie when the water moved in the silence. Inside the hut we did not have solid doors or heavy furniture. Our rooms were separated only by curtains, thin pieces of cloth hanging on strings, moving when the wind pushed them, or when someone brushed against them. The whole place felt light and fragile, like if you walked too hard the floor might echo louder than you expect. It was the kind of house that made you feel exposed, as if there was not much distance between you and whatever might be waiting outside in the dark. At that time, I already had my baby, just 1 year old, still so small and innocent, still at that stage where every smile looked pure and every tear felt like a storm. He was my world, my biggest responsibility, and my greatest joy. And even though I was always tired from work, I tried my best to be present for him whenever I could. But that day, when all of this happened, he was not with me in the hut. He was with his grandmother, my mother-in-law, just a few steps away from where we lived, at their home nearby. She often helped me by taking care of him for a while so I could rest, especially because I was working in a call center at that time and my schedule was the opposite of most people's. while others slept at night and moved about during the day. I was often awake in the late hours, talking to strangers on the phone, handling complaints, answering questions, forcing my voice to sound awake and polite even when my body felt like collapsing. When my shift ended and the sun started to rise, my day was only beginning in a different way. Taking care of my child, doing chores, and then trying to squeeze in whatever sleep I could manage during daylight. Sleeping at day became normal for me, even if my body never fully liked it. The house would be warmer, the light seeping through any thin fabric it could, the sounds from outside more alive than at night, but I had no choice. That was my life then, and I did what I needed to do. On the day this happened, I remember being very tired. I lay down to sleep in our small room inside the hut, knowing my baby was safe with his grandmother. There was a kind of silence there, not empty but full of faint background noises. Maybe the soft rustling of the trees, maybe distant voices carried by the wind, maybe the occasional murmur of the creek nearby. The curtain that served as our door hung in place, unmoving at first, only a thin barrier between me and whatever was beyond that bedroom space. I drifted into sleep, the kind of sleep that comes suddenly when your body has been pushed beyond its limits. I do not remember dreaming at first. I only remember the heaviness of my body and the relief of closing my eyes. Then, somewhere between deep sleep and waking, I was suddenly pulled out of that calm state by a noise. It was not a loud crash or a scream, nothing like that. It was a sound coming from the direction of the bedroom curtain, something subtle but sharp enough to shake my awareness awake. It was like the curtain had been disturbed, as if someone had brushed it or pushed it aside. The sound of the fabric moving was the first thing that made my heart beat faster. My eyes opened, and for a moment I simply stared at the curtain, trying to understand what had woken me up. At first, there was nothing, just the familiar outline of the hanging cloth in the low light of the room. But then I saw it, something that did not belong to any normal moment. Not a person, not a shadow from a tree, not a trick of the light. It was a black, shadowy entity, hovering near the curtain, as if it had slipped into the room from the space just beyond. It did not look like someone standing there in dark clothes. It looked more like a shape that was made from darkness itself, with edges that were not solid but shifting, almost like smoke trying to hold a form. The closest thing I could compare it to, even though I am not a big fan of those movies, was the shadowy creatures in one of the Harry Potter films, those floating, cloaked beings that glide through the air, their bodies trailing off into wisps of smoke. That was what it reminded me of, a figure, but not a solid one, floating slightly above the ground with a smoky, liquid edge that never fully settled. It moved toward me in an almost slow and deliberate way, not rushing, not jumping, just gliding. My entire body tensed, but at the same time I felt something strange happening inside me. As this black, smoky presence reached out what I can only describe as its hands toward me, I suddenly started to feel very weak. It was as if all the strength in my body was draining away, being pulled out of me by invisible threads. I could not shout. I could not push it away. My limbs felt heavy and useless, like they no longer belonged to me. I remember its face, or where its face should have been, near me, and then I became aware of what felt like it sucking something from me, like it was trying to draw my energy, or even my life force through its mouth. I did not see teeth or lips the way we see them on a normal person, but I knew that whatever its mouth was, that was where the pull was coming from. The sensation was terrifying. It was as if my insides were turning hollow, as if my blood, my warmth, my strength were being taken. The only visual I clearly remember while this was happening was smoke, thick, dark smoke that seemed to swirl and move where its body should be, almost completely wrapping me in its presence. At some point during this experience, I felt myself being lifted. My physical body, which had been so weak moments before, now felt strangely light, as if the rules that normally kept me pressed against the bed had been cancelled. I had the awareness that I was no longer lying flat on my back like a normal sleeping person. Instead, I was rising, being suspended in the air by a force that was not my own. I felt my body rising upwards, my awareness completely awake inside this awful moment, and I remember seeing that I was only about an inch away from the ceiling. The ceiling of our hut was not very high to begin with, but the fact that I was that close to it, floating, still stunned me. I could see the details of the ceiling more clearly than I normally would, the texture, any tiny cracks or marks that I would not pay attention to on a regular day. It was like being pushed up by invisible hands and held there, just below the barrier between me and the roof. At the same time, I was not fully in control. I did not climb or jump or stand. I was being held up and suspended by that black entity that had reached for me. For a while I stayed in that strange state, feeling like I was not completely attached to the bed anymore, my body hanging in the air, my consciousness trembling with fear and confusion. Then, slowly, I began to feel myself being lowered. The movement was gentle, as if something had decided to place me back down, letting gravity reclaim me. I felt myself descending from that near-ceiling level down toward where I knew my bed should be. It felt like being on a slow elevator that you never asked to ride, one that only goes up and down in a small, frightening space. In my mind, I was sure that when the movement stopped, I would be back on my bed, lying just as I had been before, except now shaken and exhausted from what had just happened. Everything about the experience felt real, the sensation of being lifted, the feeling of being so close to the ceiling, the slow lowering, the softness of the descent. I was aware of my clothes, the way they felt against my skin, aware of how the room looked, aware of my own thoughts panicking inside my head. It did not feel like a dream with random pieces sewn together. It felt like continuous, clear moments happening in order. But when the lowering stopped and I felt something solid beneath me, and when my full consciousness snapped back into place, I realized that something did not match my expectations at all. I was not on my bed. I was on the floor. I looked around, trying to understand how I had ended up there. The floor felt firm under my body, and when I checked myself, I realized that I was unhurt. There were no bruises, no cuts, no pain from a fall. It was not like I had simply rolled off the bed in my sleep and crashed to the ground in an ungraceful heap. I had been suspended inches from the ceiling. I had felt myself being lowered. And yet here I was now, lying on the floor as if that was where I had been placed, safe but shaken. I knew in my heart, with a certainty that did not leave space for doubts, that this was not just a normal dream. Something had happened in that room, something that involved that black ghost-like figure, and whatever power it had used on me. I got up as quickly as my weak body would allow. My heart was pounding, my hands were probably trembling, and I knew I could not just lie there and pretend everything was normal. I rushed outside, needing air, needing light, needing another living person to tell this to, someone who would either calm me down or at least confirm that I was not losing my mind. I went to my mother-in-law, who thankfully was nearby since her home was only a few steps from our hut. When I reached her, I told her everything I could manage to describe, my words probably tumbling out quickly and shakily. I told her about the noise at the curtain, about the black smoky entity, about the feeling of it draining my strength, about floating up, seeing the ceiling, being lowered back down, and then waking up on the floor instead of on my bed. To my relief, she did not laugh at me or tell me I was imagining things. She said she believed me, and the way she said it made me feel that she had been waiting for something like this to be told. Then she shared something from her past, a piece of local history that I had not known before, and that made my experience even more unsettling. She told me that when she was young, a tragedy had happened near that very place, involving a young woman from the neighborhood. According to her, this young lady had been found dead and bleeding in the creek near where we lived. The same creek that was only a few meters away from our hut, the one whose water I could hear sometimes when everything else was quiet. The young woman had committed suicide there. My mother-in-law said that when they found her, all her clothes had been ripped by scissors. The image she painted with those details was horrifying, a woman so devastated by her pain, so broken by her situation, that she had lost her mind and chosen to end her life in a violent, self-destructive way. She said the woman had gone mad because her partner had left her, abandoning her emotionally or physically, and that this heartbreak had pushed her beyond the limits of her mind. As my mother-in-law described what the woman looked like, how she had been seen or remembered before her death, and how she may have appeared afterwards as a ghost, I started to feel a cold recognition. What she was saying matched almost exactly what I had seen, a black lady ghost. Her clothes shattered or torn in a way that did not look natural, suspended in the air, not fully bound by the rules that keep living people on the ground. The description of the black figure with damaged clothing, connected to someone who had died near the creek, lined up too clearly with my experience to dismiss it. It felt like that young woman's restless spirit had found its way into the hut, reaching out with smoky hands, pulling at my strength, perhaps trying to communicate, perhaps simply repeating its own pain in a way I could not understand. From that moment on, the hut no longer felt like just a temporary, fragile home. It felt like a place shared with something else that did not belong to the world of the living anymore. That experience changed the way I approached sleep. Before, I had already been tired from my job and cautious about the ordinary dangers of life. But now I found myself afraid of the unseen as well. I began to sleep with a scapular around my neck, a small sign of faith that I hoped would act as a shield, a physical object that carried prayers and protection. I could not bear the thought of lying unguarded in that room again, not after feeling myself lifted from my bed by something I could not fight. I also started to hold a rosary in my hand when I slept, wrapping my fingers around it as if clinging to a lifeline. The beads became my silent companions in the dark, the only things I felt I had to defend myself if she ever returned. I told myself that as long as I had the scapular on my chest and the rosary in my fingers, I would be safer, that maybe the spirit would see those signs of faith and decide to leave me alone. Even then, it was hard to relax. I would lie in bed, listening for any sound from the curtain, watching any slight movement of the fabric, trying to quiet my mind enough to fall asleep but always ready to wake up if something felt off. Sometimes I tried to reason with myself, telling myself that it could have been a dream, that I might have been so tired from work and stress that my mind created this whole experience, mixing my fears and exhaustion into one vivid roll of images. But whenever I leaned too hard toward that explanation, some part of me pushed back and insisted that it was not that simple. Dreams usually feel disconnected and forgettable after a while, yet this one remained clear in my mind. In that event, I had seen my bed, I had seen the room, I had seen the ceiling as if I were truly that close to it. I had felt the weightlessness of being lifted, the hardness of the floor when I woke, the shape of the entity reaching toward me. I remembered the exact clothes I had been wearing, remembered being aware of what was happening in a way that did not feel like a jumbled dream. Everything about it felt too sharp, too detailed, too real. The fact that my mother-in-law had a story that matched what I saw only made it stronger. So I kept my scapular around my neck, kept my rosary in my hand, and tried to live my life as normally as possible while a part of me remained on guard, always wondering if, one day, I might wake up again to the sound of a curtain moving and see that black ghost suspended in the air, reaching for me from the shadows.